our hearing. Great. Our hearing is, we are now reconvening the public hearing of the Labor and Public Employees Committee on this, the 18th of February. And we thank everyone in the public who's been watching to make sure that we thank you for your patience as we attended to other committee business. We are now going to continue. When we left off, we were speaking with Elise, I'm sorry, when we left off, we were speaking with Rachel Deutsch. And I know we had said to her that there might be an opportunity for more questions. And I think she was prepared to come back if we had questions for her. But at this time, I'm going to move to the next person on our speakers list. And that's number 36. And I see you are here, Sarah Locke. Good to see you.
Hi, Senator Kushner. Very good to see you. And thank you, members of the Labor and Public Employees Committee. My name is Sarah Locke. I live in New Haven, and I'm here in full support of Senate Bill 668, the concerning a fair work week schedule. I know you have 15 bills today and time is of the essence, so I did submit many pages of testimony, but to summarize, I'm here to speak on my 2 decades of experience as a server and a bartender, and some of the issues that come up when you don't have a predictable schedule or a fair work week. So some of the main things that came up in those 20 years were restaurants doing things that were related to overstaffing. So they would intentionally overstaff a restaurant and then kind of wait 2 to 3 hours before essentially the food would even be served. So you'd sort of be waiting around to see if it was going to get busy. And at that point, since we're not making tips, we are working off of the, sort of below minimum wage hourly rate that I'm sure all the committee members are aware of, because it's we're paid based on the assumption that we'll get tips. But if we work 2 hours of a shift and then get sent home before we see anybody, then we're actually working for, about $6 an hour or less. And at that time, we're not really allowed to stand around. So you usually have to do things like clean a bathroom or stock shelves or mop a floor. And then you get sent home because they've intentionally overstaffed and they're just waiting to see if some surprise happens where customers come in. Another thing that is tough for predicting a schedule, predicting a balanced budget would be the on-call shift. So a lot of restaurants do shifts where you have 3 guaranteed shifts a week and then 1 on-call shift. And you don't really have a choice over what night you're going to be on call. And you basically have to be no more than 20 minutes away from the restaurant between the opening and closing hours, which is anywhere from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. And you can't choose what shift is going to be your on-call shift. So often this would come at a night, for me at least, when I had class, and I would have to sort of say, like, do I go to class and maybe keep my phone on and have to leave early? Do I skip class? And I know for parents of young children, this was even more of a burden. They had to have babysitters on call in case they became the on-call person. Weather is a big issue in restaurants related to a predictable schedule, because if the weather changes, 2 or 3 people can get sent home. And this is, again, the same circumstance where you've been there for 3 hours, you have negated anything else you could have done that night, like, for example, be with your family, go to school, even have a second job and have a reliable income, and you've worked 3 hours at $6 an hour and then have been sent home for weather that we sort of could have predicted in advance. I think that another problem with not having a fair work week is the sort of like opening and closing schedules that often happen in a restaurant, where you're going to work until sort of 11 or 12 p.m. at night and have to be there at about 8 a.m. the next morning. And all this relates to just not having control or a voice in your own schedule. And most commonly, in the over a dozen restaurants I worked in, you also don't know your schedule more than about a week in advance. So it's really hard to plan time with family or chosen family. It's hard to try to pursue an education. It's certainly very hard to have another job. And I think overall, if we're thinking about hourly workers and who this impacts, it's overwhelmingly people of color and women of color. So this is really an issue about families and an issue about equity, not just equality, right? But an intentional rebalancing of that equity.
Thank you, Ms. Locke. Your 3 minutes are up. Thank you. If you could.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll stick around if there's any questions.
Thank you. When you get the 3-minute warning, you can finish your thought and sentence if you wanted to, but
it would just be a thank you to all of you for having this hearing, for spending the time on all of these really important bills, and I strongly support Senate Bill 668.
Great. I do see a question from Representative Winkler.
The situation you described, and thank you for your testimony, you go in for 2 hours, you don't wait on any tables, you get sent home. The statute says that you should get paid $12 an hour, the actual minimum wage, as opposed to this sub-minimum wage.
It's never happened.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Quite clearly, Representative, they would be breaking the law, and she would have recourse.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to cut off the banter, although I don't think it was really banter. I understand that Representative Ritigliano, you were clarifying the law, and I appreciate that. But hopefully you'll do that through the chair next time. And thank you, Sarah, for testifying here today and for spending this time with us. Good to see you.
You too. Thanks.
Okay, next I'm going to call on Joanne Samatero. Did I get your last name correctly, Joanne?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead. We can hear you.
Thank you. Greetings to the Labor Committee. My name is Joanne Samatero. I am here to speak in favor of Senate Bill 666, which would expand PTSI coverage under workers' compensation to include correctional staff, EMS, and dispatchers. I currently work as a public safety dispatcher for the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. I am a member of AFSCME Local 610, whose membership includes public safety dispatchers throughout Eastern Connecticut. I have 31 years dispatching experience, nearly 18 with Connecticut State Police. I have also worked for the towns of Ledyard and Waterford. A study done by Northern Illinois University suggests that on-the-job indirect exposure to trauma puts the dispatcher at risk for PTSI. Dispatchers suffer from vicarious trauma, otherwise known as compassion fatigue, cumulative stress, and secondary trauma. While our police officers are covered by workers' compensation for PTSI, their dispatchers who handle the same calls are not covered. Public safety dispatchers are under enormous pressure to control their emotions while extracting pertinent information from understandably hysterical callers and disseminating that information at the correct time to the correct units in an easy to understand, concise, and professional manner. The massive adrenaline dump that our field units experience are exactly the same for dispatchers, but we are unable to work off that response with physical activity like our field units can because we are tethered to a desk. Dispatchers just sit and marinate in stress hormones as we move on to the next telephone call with no break. Dispatchers work under significant emotional stress. One does not need to see the events frontline emergency workers do to be affected by them. It is not just the sense of sight that invokes emotions. Hearing these horrors and being unable to physically move is just as effective in causing distress that leads to PTSI. Suicides, domestic violence calls, vehicle accidents, and overdoses are our callers' worst nightmares. Dispatchers spend their careers talking to people who are having the worst day of their lives. There's not even the opportunity to process what you've just heard. We must move on to the next call. Dispatchers are like electricity. No one gives us a second thought until something goes wrong and we're not functioning properly. Currently, dispatchers have no social insurance safety net. PTSI affects job performance. It leads to increased errors, and no one wants their dispatchers to have increased errors. We are the first responders on the front line of every crisis. That's why I urge you to support SB 666. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joanne, for your testimony. We did hear from other dispatchers today, and I think you being here and sharing this information and the words we heard from others today really does help us to understand the importance of this piece of legislation that's been proposed. So thank you for being with us and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, ma'am.
And I don't see any hands at this time, so I am going to go to the next person on our list, I understand that Kathy Ryan's star is not with us, and so I'm going to move to number 39, which is Richard Haber. Excuse me.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I want to thank the sponsors of this bill, and I'm testifying today in support of proposed bill 6343, which is an act ensuring fair employment protection for gig workers. I am an attorney and have been for 29 years. My law firm, Haber, McKenna, and Dinsmore, represents workers. And we are really, in my view, the front lines enforcement mechanism in this state for making sure that workers are treated fairly. There's no better enforcement mechanism than bringing a lawsuit for damages, including a class action lawsuit for damages, and we do that on behalf of workers. And we have a unique opportunity to see on the front lines what's happening, especially since the pandemic in March of last year, which is that workers are being sent home to work, and more workers who are losing their job are picking up jobs in the gig economy, working for Grubhub, working for Amazon, working for Uber. And employers are classifying them as independent contractors, which deprives them of all of the protections of the employment statutes. They get no unemployment, they get no minimum wage, they get no overtime wages, they get no protection from the employment discrimination laws. They are treated, they literally can be paid in a way that results in almost nothing being paid to them when you consider the wear and tear or the cost of their own car and gas and parking and things like that when they're delivering packages to us all as we're sitting in our homes waiting for them to deliver them. And so the fix that I see starts with an amendment to the ABC test. This is the Connecticut test built into the Unemployment Compensation Act, 31-122, the definition section, that allows, and I called it in my written testimony, the remote worker loophole. It allows employers in part to say that these workers are not employees, but in fact are just independent contractors because they don't work on a physical premises owned and controlled by the employer. So the fact that we are all on Zoom right now, to me, illustrates exactly the point here. And Chief Justice Rogers in 2016, in a case, wrote herself, so these aren't my words, these are the words of former Chief Justice, there is nothing inherent in work carried on in dispersed locations that renders those who perform it less subject to unemployment and the hardship it causes than those who work in fixed locations maintained by their employers. Today, with the reality of people working at home or on the road or in cafes, delivering packages, doing all of these things that are keeping us all safe now, that simply shouldn't be a consideration in determining whether they're entitled to the protection of our employee rights laws. And removing specifically the second part of the B prong of the ABC test would be a simple fix that would take care of that. The state of Massachusetts already did that in 2004. The state of California did it through its judicial branch, through an opinion by the Supreme Court of the state of California in 2018. Connecticut is a blue state. If we care about our workers, if we want to be leaders in this area, we should do the same. And I stand behind this bill. There aren't specifics in it, but this is my belief. And since firms like mine are going to be the ones enforcing it, I think allowing people like me to testify, and perhaps in the future, as the bill moves forward to more concrete details, we can provide more information.
Thank you, Attorney Haber. I do see a hand, Representative Rutigliano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Attorney Haber, I come to this issue with an open mind. I really do. I mean, I understand that some workers like to, take little part-time jobs, but, Uber is a gigantic company in California worth billions of dollars. So I really am trying to learn. How do we enforce the ABC test or making these people an employee when the company is really kind of a virtual company, right? I mean, aren't they, and they're located in California. Do we have a right to do that? Can we do that?
You don't enforce it, I do.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, so the Wage Act has in it an attorney's fee provision. We call these private attorney general statutes. We simply can't afford to tell our constituents, your constituents, that they need to pay more taxes to put more attorney generals at 55 Elm Street. And so we invite private law firms like mine to bring lawsuits for damages when these companies violate these laws. It doesn't matter if they're in California or not. They're subject to the jurisdiction of the state courts of the state of Connecticut if they do business here, and they most certainly do.
Okay, so even though the company doesn't have a physical presence in Connecticut, we could still, or you could still go after them legally?
I could certainly, I believe that our long arm statute allows us to sue them here. And if it didn't, I'd sue them in California. Okay.
All right. I really am looking forward to learning more about it because I really, truthfully, I do have an open mind when it comes to this subject. I don't know whether we're helping sort of people sort of get a second job real quick, or if we are really exploiting them and making this sort of gigantic company a lot more money. So I was hoping we'd get more into it today. I'm learning bits and pieces, but I appreciate you coming out.
Yeah, corporations, if I can comment on that, corporations are built to do one thing and one thing only, and that's maximize shareholder revenue. And every time I take depositions of the executives of these corporations, when I sue them, they all admit that their single largest variable expense is labor. And they do everything they possibly can to reduce labor costs. And classifying true employees as independent contractors, even if it means they lose the lawsuit that I bring, they do it anyway, because in the end, it's still profitable to do it. So they absolutely will do it. And removing the second part of the B prong, which simply says, as long as you don't work on my property, I can call you an independent contractor, simply does not make sense anymore. And nothing illustrated that more clearly than 2020.
Well, I appreciate your answer. And I'm certainly not opposed to making money, but I do understand your point. All right.
Thank you, Representative Bertugliano, and thank you, Attorney Haber. As was said here, I think there's a lot about work that has been changing slowly over the past several decades, but it's become more acute now in the last probably decade. And so we see gig workers as a phrase that we never even knew before 10 years, didn't know that phrase. And I think it is incumbent on us as work changes, as the world changes, we have to adapt, and we have to adopt statutes that will guide that work and continue to protect those that were intended to be protected from the very beginning. And so, you know, with laws that have been on the books for many, many years, I have had some experience with independent contractors who were misclassified, or employees who were misclassified as independent contractors, and have at times found compromises through unionization that didn't require we end up before the court on the issue, but it isn't a long-term solution for most gig workers. So I appreciate your testimony here today. And Representative Bertugliano, I think you make a good point that we need to have forums to understand this better as the world changes. And hopefully we'll find a mechanism to do that, because public hearings with a list of 50 people are difficult, and we don't necessarily get that in-depth conversation. But there are other forums available to us, and we'll see what we can do to make that happen in the future, including informational forums and other possibilities. But thank you for your testimony here today. And I do
appreciate that, Madam Chairman. I appreciate that.
I see another hand here, and that is Representative Aurora. You're muted, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Attorney Haber, for your testimony. You know, the question here is that there are two questions I have. One is about a demarcation of folks who are essentially working much shorter time, essentially a real gig work, right? You know, you're doing it to supplement, or you're doing it as a stopgap before you go to the other job. So that's one I want to see, how does that work? Because we saw in California, folks who were driving for Uber or who were very upset when this whole thing happened, because they had for a year the California law did the same thing, classified everyone, and then they redid the law, or there was a referendum, as you know. And the second question, so that's my first question, that is there some way to look at this bill or legislation to demarcate that anybody who's spending more than 40 hours or who's using this as a full-time job, essentially, irrespective of the fact that their work flexibility does not mean that they are part-time, or they are, but at the same time, those who are essentially doing gig work by doing a certain number of hours to supplement, for them to be, to have full employment as a classifying them as an employer with what we have, would that be appropriate?
So respectfully, I imagine that your constituents would answer this question very quickly and very easily, and they would say that it doesn't matter whether it's their 41st hour of work, their 13th hour of work, or their 70th hour of work. Being an employee is still being an employee. And I also believe that if what you're suggesting is that Uber couldn't afford to make the massive profits that they make if they had to classify these people as workers and as employees, and these jobs would somehow disappear, that is wildly untrue. There's no support for that suggestion. I'm not sure if that's what you were suggesting. That is a ridiculously wealthy company, and they can afford to obey employment laws. So none of these jobs will disappear. And a job is a job is a job. A worker is a worker. An employee is an employee. And saying that if you already have a full-time job, we're going to call you a gig worker because this is your nighttime job would be wildly unfair to the working class. And I know you don't want to do that.
No, the follow-up is, first of all, neither do I have an understanding of Uber's profitability. Last I knew, they were losing cash, and just basically last year, and they're saying they're going to lose cash for the next 4 years. But I'm not going to discuss that, how much cash they make or lose. That's beyond the purview of our discussion.
I don't believe that for a second.
Well, that's what their balance sheet or income statement. So, but again, that's not, we can believe whatever we that's beyond the point. We know that they say they lose cash every single year, and it's shareholders' cash they're putting forward. But again, let's not belabor that point, because that, we're not here to discuss.
Well, also because Uber is not one of your constituents, right?
Okay, excuse me.
Not at all.
Hold on, folks. We're going to conduct this orderly. So, Attorney Haber, for Representative Aurora to finish his question before you answer. That is the reason why we ask people to address their questions to the chair, because it does provide for a more orderly hearing. So Representative Work will say through the chair, and then I communicate that. I am getting feedback here as well, and I'm not sure what that is, because I don't have two devices on. But we definitely get into that as we proceed. I only have one device. So, but going back to the question, did you have another question, Representative Aurora? Because I know we were, you guys were getting into a little back and forth, and I'd like to prevent that.
Yeah, no, that's the question, the second question which I had was, we were talking initially about lost my train of thought, about gig workers as classified as those who have who are truly gig workers, or those who are doing 3 hours, a few hours. But the other element of unintended consequence, which we saw, was a lot of folks who basically were working not in that environment, specifically Uber but consulting environment. The case which got quite a lot of publicity was actors, or part-time consultants. They basically now started getting classified as full-time employees, and that just didn't work. So most of those opportunities went away. They went to other states. And so the whole thing, and so there was a reason that there was a huge backlash against that piece of legislation in other states. And I think, we are a 3.5 million people state, so it's important to learn from other states.
Representative Aurora, if you would ask the question, because you are out of time, but I do want you to have the opportunity to ask your question.
Yeah, no, the question is that, do you think that it would have unintended consequences for many other professions as well, including consulting, including acting, including creative work, financial consulting, and so on and so forth?
Thank you. Attorney Haber, do you have an answer for that?
I do not think it would have unintended consequences at all. I don't know. Consultants, if someone wants to open their own consulting company, that's what an independent contractor is. Or a painter who buys a truck and buys paintbrushes and has their own business and puts up a website and has business cards. That's a person that's independent. If a person is working for another entity and their work depends solely on that other entity, they are an employee. And the fact that they are going door to door or working at home or opening up a laptop at a Starbucks should not be a factor. And removing that factor from the modern world wouldn't have unintended consequences at all. It would simply bring us into the reality of the modern world that we are seeing right now, with all of us being on Zoom, being in our homes, doing our jobs.
Madam Chair, I would like to ask what solely means, because many of these, the reason they're gig workers is because they're working for 6 firms at the same time: DoorDash and Lyft and Uber.
Representative Aurora, you have your time, and I've been very courteous to allow you to finish that other question. We will have an opportunity to address these questions to other people on the speaker list, or I would encourage you to get in touch with Attorney Haber. Thank you.
I will, but Madam Chair, I do find this very objectionable because you are allowing most other people to continue in their line of discussion and to stop in me. I just find it really, really objectionable. I really protest and object to this.
Representative Aurora, I have worked very hard to make sure that each member of the committee stuck to their 3 minutes. I've allowed a certain amount of flexibility, especially to you. You've had a little more flexibility than others. And so you did go well beyond, probably more like 6 minutes. So you chose to make some comments, which I did not call out of order as well. So that's fine. But we are going to move to the next person on the list and any other this time. Thank you, Attorney Haber, for being with us today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
So next on the list. Next on the list, we have, and I didn't see you before, I apologize that for, I will go back and call on number 38. Kathy, and is it Ryan Starr?
It is Ryan Starr, yes.
Kathy Ryan Starr, thank you. We can hear you, so go ahead.
Great. Thank you all so much for the work that you are doing today and listening to this testimony and the work you do day in and day out. I appreciate you. I am Reverend Kathy Ryan Starr. I live in West Hartford, and I am the co-minister of the Unitarian Society of Hartford at Bloomfield and Albany. It looks like a spaceship for those of you who may have seen it. I am here to testify in support of SB 668, the Fair Work Week bill. I am a parent of 2 small children and a minister who works all sorts of odd hours, as most ministers do. And I know that it is hard enough as a salaried job with lots of support and enough income to get childcare to work the evenings and weekends that my job requires. And that's with ample planning to find babysitters before COVID to figure out what we're doing now. And ending on-call, on-demand scheduling as it stands now would afford that same right, not privilege, but right to all workers. My Unitarian Universalist faith, we don't focus on what happens after we die, on heaven or hell there. We focus on what happens in this life. And we believe that we can create heaven on this earth. But I know that on-call and on-demand scheduling is a version of hell for so many workers. Workers who, like everybody, deserve enough love, enough housing, enough food, enough joy, enough time with their children and their loved ones. That's something that everyone deserves. And when you don't know whether you're going to be called into work on an instant and try to get there on a day like today where it's snowy or icy, and whether you might lose your job for that, you don't have that quality of life that is something that everyone can and should have. Workers deserve respect and fair wages and time with their families. They deserve predictable time to be able to carve out time in their day to be at this hearing like I am doing, to participate in civic life, to participate in leadership in my congregation, on their PTO, to coach a team. These are all things that help us all have a good society, not just the workers themselves, but to help everybody have a good community. And to do that, you need to be able to plan. You need to be able to have predictability in scheduling more than an hour or a day out. SB 668 is good for workers. It is good for all of us. And I applaud your work to get it passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Starr. Appreciate your testimony. I don't see any hands at this time, but I appreciate you bringing a new perspective to the issue at hand. So thank you so much. And I am going to turn over the chair to Representative Sanchez. Thank you for giving me a brief break.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Thank you for the testimony. The next person we have is Greg Allard. We have Greg Allard here.
Mr. Chair, it looks like we do not have Greg at the moment.
Okay. And Devin, who do we have next on the list? I'm sorry, I'm still trying to pull it up.
Not a problem. Mr. Chair, next we have Kara Dwayne.
Okay, thank you. Devin, Kara Dwayne, please.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello, my name is Kara Dwayne. I'm here to speak in support of Bill SB 666. My father, Jeremy Dwayne, committed suicide February 25th, 2019. He was employed as a correctional officer for the state of Connecticut at Corrigan-Rogowski Correctional Institution for 13 years. He was an incredible man, husband, father, grandfather, and correctional officer. He approached his job with great pride and dignity every single day. His priority was to not only make his facility, but the world around him a better place. His career was his livelihood, and much like everything else he did, he poured his heart and soul into his job. Through him working countless hours behind prison walls, we as a family watched him slowly lose himself and the positive, joyous man that he was known to be. As it is not hard to imagine the type of environment that exists behind prison walls, this wasn't just a thought, but rather an everyday reality for all corrections officers, including my father. He endured incredible hardships during his time as a correctional officer, essentially witnessing humans at their worst every single day. Suicides, deaths, assaults. The constant urgent feeling of having to look over your shoulder, be aware of your surroundings at all times, and worry about protecting yourself from danger at any given moment. These things were forever imprinted in his brain. His job did not end when he left the building or ended a shift, and he carried all of this with him wherever he went. He would leave the facility, put on a brave face, and come home to his family while in an attempt to carry on a normal, loving life. But the fact of the matter was that was not a possibility. These harboring emotions were not things you can choose to turn on and off. The feelings and experiences he chose to internalize eventually ended up him costing his life. On February 25th, 2019, my father left his shift at Corrigan-Rogowski Correctional Institution, drove home, left his cell phone, took his firearm, and took his own life by gunshot. We, the Dwayne family, were forced to move forward without our father, grandfather, husband, and our friend. Had there been other resources or outlets made available to him throughout his career, our story may have ended differently. We ask that you please consider this bill in order to potentially save other families and lives, and so that our correctional officers do not have to suffer in silence any longer. I would like to thank the Labor Committee for listening to my testimony today.
Thank you, Ms. Dwayne. I'm so sorry for your loss. Do we have any questions of any of the representatives? Representative Hughes.
Ms. Dwayne, I just wanted to thank you for your testimony on behalf of the profession of corrections officers everywhere. And I am just really, really sad for your loss and the loss of a good man in public service. And I want to know how we can resource the entire system better to protect both the workers and the families that are impacted by a pretty horrific system that we have. So I just wanted to thank you for showing up and testifying on behalf of the entire workforce.
Thank you.
Representative Aurora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Kara. I have no question. I just have a comment, or just wanted to say we're really sorry to hear about your father, and I thank you for the testimony, because I think these are the things which really make us when you tell us these real tragic situations, we need to basically take action and understand these issues in much more detail as to what can be done. But I thank you for your testimony, for your courage to come up. And once again, please express our condolence.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions of Ms. Dwayne? Ms. Dwayne, thank you again for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Bear with me for 2 seconds, folks. I'm pulling up the lists. Devin, who do we have next? I apologize. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Not a problem, Mr. Chair. Next, we have Ms. Teresa Ghilarducci.
Very good. Very good. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Teresa Ghilarducci, and I am a professor of economics of policy analysis at the New School for Social Research. I have taught labor economics for 38 years, 25 years at the University of Notre Dame. And I'm here to faithfully describe the economic research that's relevant to the worker recall proposal, SB 658. There is considerable high quality research in economics that concludes that unemployment is scarring for anyone who's unemployed. But unfortunately, that scarring is more severe for those because of social norms and custom that generate discrimination and prejudgment are what we call LIFO. They're sort of last in and they're first out. These are workers that are age 50 and above, are generally under 25, women and non-white workers. Other studies confirm that workers who insist on their labor rights, for instance, push forward OSHA standards at their workplace, are also more likely to be laid off and not hired. So from the point of view of workers, recall legislation would help this big group of what economists call the LIFO workers. They would get back to work and they would get back to work more quickly. The economic research also concludes if all employers furloughed employees instead of laid them off, or offered to hire back the qualified former employees in order of tenure, then permanent layoffs in an economy would be minimized. An economy with fewer permanent layoffs is an economy with less household anxiety, and as Professor Irby testified to, would in turn help maintain their not only their equilibrium, but maintain their consumption. And employers attached to experienced workers are also employers that have higher productivity. So in these ways, these pathways, recall legislation would help the overall economy. Now, research also looks at this issue from the point of view of employers. And that research provides evidence consistent with the hypothesis that employers that recall their former workers avoid substantial turnover costs. Those are hiring and training costs, and really benefit in the long term. Now, employers may resist legislation requiring them to recall workers. We find that they are tempted by the possibility that when they do hire again, that they can choose among a large pool of unemployed workers and find that imagined perfect worker. But the evidence finds that recalling qualified former workers is far less costly for the employer. So in closing, worker recall legislation builds on the economic logic of the federal government's Paycheck Protection Program, the one we saw had bipartisan support in the early days of the pandemic. And that is because worker recall legislation and PPE aims to maintain that valuable employer-employee connection. Now, it would be best if the United States had a robust job sharing and wage replacement program, but recall legislation we see as a workaround that lacking. And if you pass recall legislation, Connecticut could be the national leader for other states. The economic research provides that a recall requirement would be a triple win for economies, workers, and employers.
Thank you, Ms. Ghilarducci. Any questions of Senator Kushner?
I was on a break, but I had to come back in to hear your testimony because Professor Ghilarducci, we've met before. I've heard you testify in other forums, and I've always been so impressed with your understanding and your ability to take data and make it understandable for those of us who are not as expert in the industry. But I do think that what you are presenting is really important. And what I hear you saying, I mean, seems to me that the situation we encountered with COVID and the pandemic, it caused so many people to suffer economically and to suffer personally from family illness and their own illnesses, that it made us as a society more understanding and willing to hear about solutions that might benefit us long term, not just as it relates to COVID. And that's what I hear you saying in your testimony. But basically, this bill is limited to recall rights for COVID, for people who were laid off as a result of the pandemic. But I would think that what you're suggesting is there might be long-term benefit to us to think of it even outside of that context.
It really is nice to see you again, Senator Kushner. Also, I think I was just being expansive. The evidence is so overwhelming that something like job sharing, wage replacement, a general recall legislation would be so good. But narrowing it to COVID workers layoff even makes a lot more sense. And in fact, I think a lot of employers and the federal government would have liked it if it would already had been a federal. We economists agreed that it would have been better if that were a federal requirement at the very beginning. They would have caused probably not the kind of dip in consumption. It would have actually settled employers. It would have eliminated a lot of anxiety in the last 9 months. But yeah, I think national recall legislation would be very good.
And you also suggested that sometimes a layoff could result in workers who have maybe spoken up and spoken out about their rights might actually give an opportunity where the person wouldn't be called back. And I do want to point out when I had attended, I said this earlier, I had attended something at one of the service plazas for one of the service workers at McDonald's who was laid off because of COVID and then not recalled. He had been very active in trying to form a union and also win standard pay, which was entitled to under the law. And so your research actually supports what these workers have experienced, it would sound like.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just mine. It really is the body of labor economics research. A lot of it has been done on workers trying to enforce work and safety standards. And a little bit more research, less research though on union, but there's plenty of research on what happens to workers. They really do get punished if they just try to call their employer's attention to OSHA standards.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for testifying today, and I enjoyed seeing you again.
Yeah, really good to see you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam, or now see, I'm used to saying Madam Chair, and I can't get used to saying you there, Representative Sanchez. Thank you for the opportunity to ask that question.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you again for your testimony today.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Next up, we have Scott Dolch.
Thanks, Representative. Good afternoon, Senator Kushner, Representative Porter, Senator Sampson, and Representative Aurora, members of the Labor and Public Employees Committee. My name is Scott Dolch, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Restaurant Association. On behalf of Connecticut's 8,500 restaurant and food service location and Connecticut's 160,000 food service employees, the association is here today to oppose Senate Bill 668, an act concerning a fair work week schedule. On behalf of my industry, I would like to address this on-call scheduling bill and how this proposal would negatively impact restaurants, caterers, and private event venues across the state. Our industry is known for its flexibility for employers and flexibility for employees alike. Many employees specifically seek work in our industry for the flexibility it allows. This proposed legislation would eliminate that flexibility and mandate a new system that would hurt both the employers and the employees. Over the past 11 months, our industry has watched more than 600 restaurants close. Even for those that have managed to stay afloat, they have faced incredible challenges having to adjust to ever-changing COVID guidelines, like dining room closures, capacity limitations, business curfews, and a drop in consumer confidence because of this pandemic. These challenges have made it almost impossible to predict the future of our industry. But this proposal is unfortunately asking for our businesses to do just that, predict the future. As most of you are aware, on-call scheduling is an essential aspect to the hospitality industry due to the many factors like dinner reservations or events being added or canceled last minute, weather forcing a restaurant to close or even causing closure of an outdoor dining due to rain or lightning. And employees can call out last minute, but their shifts would still need to be replaced. These are just a few of the many examples that make this one-size-fits-all proposal a burden for everyone. In addition, this bill should be renamed restrictive scheduling, as it would eliminate the current employee-centric process that has been a staple in our industry. Accommodating employee scheduling requests is one of the best ways for restaurants to compete for and retain the best talent. Restaurant managers and owners work hard to find schedules that are mutually beneficial for everyone. However, this proposal would restrict the process and create a new rigid scheduling system. Even though SB 668 doesn't have the full text language, our association has seen and testified on similar bills in the past. Like in 2019, when the scheduling bill asked employers to post their schedule 14 days in advance, with little to no opportunity for changes, which would have caused them to understaff, eliminate shift swapping, and reduce on-call opportunities. This proposal would have a serious negative impact on our industry during normal times, but putting forth this bill in the middle of a pandemic is just thoughtless in my opinion. Also, this bill will negatively impact the very people it is seeking to help, as the current system works, and it's worked for both the employer as well as the employee. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today, and I'm happy to welcome any questions.
Thank you, sir. Representative Aurora.
Thank you, Mr. Dolch, for your testimony. I really want you to talk a little more about the flexibility or the arrangements which come about in the industry in good spirit between the employers and the employee. And right now we have been made to believe that it is the employers are bad people just forcing restrictions upon and calling employees last moment. And I'm sure there are some not reasonable employers, as in every case. But in generally, the norm, as I understand, is one of give and take, of making sure that doctors' visits are not missed. Can you talk a little bit in detail about that?
Absolutely, Representative. I appreciate the question. I think the biggest update for everybody here is to know that our employees are our family. The hardest day that our industry has ever faced was the first 2 weeks of this pandemic, where over 85,000 of our employees went on unemployment. the calls that I took from people that were crying to me as owners and operators having to make that decision. And that's what this is about. That's the flexibility. Yes. Are there bad situations? Are there people that are telling me that I've listened to some of the testimony today saying that they worked, and only got paid $6, which is against the law. And I'd love to know those restaurants, because I've always said that I will walk into that restaurant with that employee right now and have that conversation. And because that is not a good acting. That's same way with bars being bad actors right now in guidelines. So this process, the flexibility of employees representative has always been there. And I think that it's not just the employee to the employer. It's also an employee calling another person and saying, hey, can you take my shift? Can you help with that? That flexibility would be gone as well. So there's a lot of this that to unpack in our industry to understand that it's working together. It has worked. And our owners, not being labeled as, not the ones being able to be helpful, I think is completely wrong, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, there's bad actors in every industry, but the vast majority of our owners are have the best interest of their employees. Otherwise, they wouldn't have their employees. They wouldn't have those families that provide. It's a service industry. Doesn't matter how great your food is. If your team is not appreciative of being there, you would not have the experience for their goods.
Thank you, Mr. Joe.
If I could interrupt, Chairman, it's possible that Representative Aurora is the expert. I didn't know if he had a couple of things going.
I wanted to let the gentleman finish his statement. Yeah, if we can mute. Thank you, sir. Any other questions, Representative Aurora?
Yes, just a quick follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging in me. I really do appreciate that. Mr. Dolce, I also want you to talk a little bit about the fact that that there's very few employers. The norm for employers is not to unduly change shifts. Or talk to us about why do employers, you refer to it that this is a business need, and it's not as if it's done in any bad form. Please talk to us why there's a business necessity which needs to be matched. If you don't know your demand more than 2 days in advance, you cannot schedule your resources more than 2 days in advance. Can you talk to that? Because the matching between demand and resource has to be there for a business to be able to, to exist. So I want you to really talk to that for us, please.
Absolutely. I think this pandemic, Representative, has shined a very big light on that challenge. Is, every day is a new struggle for our industry. We don't know what tomorrow holds. I know I put that in my testimony, but you don't know where consumer confidence is. You don't know, people, we've seen the highest number of reservation decline, people canceling it last minute during this pandemic than we've ever seen. So when you're trying to put a staff together, hoping that, hey, this is the right number, we're going to have this many covers tonight, is great. If you had that crystal ball, you don't. In normal times, or obviously this pandemic has shined that light, but it's about being open and flexible, not only to, if they had to cancel someone's shift, but also if they get a big party that's called the day before, to be able to say, hey, do you want to take on this, party of 12 that you're going to get these tips? You want that opportunity. That's the other side of this that would hurt as well. You're not able to add, where if someone calls and said, unfortunately, we're going to want to do a bereavement in 48 hours and you don't have that staffing for it, you want to be able to offer that to your staff. So it works on both ways, Representative, that I think is important. That's how our industry really, works, to make sure it works for both the employee and the employer, that they have that flexibility. But you don't know what a lightning storm or rain. We think we're going to get 10 inches today. It's maybe only 2, so people are coming out. You trying to understand how you're going to be able to be flexible, and that is very important. And that's why the flexibility is something people, our employees love about our industry, which we've seen on national scales in surveys and feedback that of the vast majority love that opportunity to be flexible, as well as the employer and the employee.
Thank you so much. And that's basically for me. I do think that it is of all times, COVID is the worst time to bring this up, because your industry has been so badly hurt. And thanks for the work you all have done in keeping the industry and businesses open. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time you give me.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you very much for being here, Scott. Representative Aurora covered a lot of the territory I wanted to mention, but I do want to thank you for being here to represent the restaurant across our state. I've been in direct contact with a number of restaurants in my district. Some of those folks I know have known personally for years, and I know how they run their businesses. And you know, some of the testimony today has been a little shocking to me, because at least the restaurants that I know, I think the owners are very upfront with their employees about what the job entails and what their expectations are. It's just frustrating to listen to some folks complain that they're being forced to do things. In our economy, no one's being forced to do anything. I mean, employees can leave a job they don't like at any time. And employers are really the ones whose hands are tied in many cases. I guess what I want to ask you more than anything really is just, do you see, especially under the circumstances where restaurant owners are being told that they must be closed, not by their own choice, because of COVID, and they're constantly being pulled back and forth about whether or not they can stay open till 9 o'clock or beyond that, or when things might reopen, and the requirements that they're having to deal with right now. They don't seem to have a single ability to voice their concerns. The government's going to tell them what to do no matter what. I guess what I'm asking is would this bill really impact restaurants in a negative light to be able to operate during the COVID situation and afterwards? Is it going to have a negative impact by forcing them to spend money that they don't even have based on the current financial crunch that they're in?
Thanks, Senator, for the question. And yes, I've heard from a lot of restaurants in your town. I appreciate everyone here, that their support for our industry. But yeah, I think let's be honest. The risk of this, I think I brought a little bit up in my testimony. You know, if it was where, you know, obviously there's only 2 sentences currently in the bill, but if it was back in 2019, when I looked at the bill before, when it was 14 days, you know, when you look at that, 14 days, 2 weeks, a lot can happen in 2 weeks. We're watching a pandemic where we've seen 600 hospitalizations dropped in 2 weeks. Like, you can't control tomorrow, more or less 2 weeks. So to try to have schedules, you always want to be flexible. You always want to be upfront with your staff in any business, but in our industry, in hospitality, it would be detrimental because you don't know. We don't know if there's a third wave. We don't, you know, if even, let's just say you put this into play and we're still in the pandemic, and all of a sudden you've got everyone booked and ready to go, and all of a sudden the government comes, no, we're gonna make it even tougher for you to run your business because of curfew, because of, oh, you can only go back down to 25% capacity. All of that plays such a role that is out of their control. And I think that you're making a great point, that we're talking about the flexibility that this industry provides. And at the end of the day, you know, I think some of the testimony on going back to, like, if they're not following it, if a restaurant is a bad actor, that's where my role is for. I'm then doing the same thing with the governor every day on bad actors in our guidelines. If let's clean up the bad actors, but let's not make legislation that's going to punish everybody. I think that's where something we have to be very careful of, in making sure we don't lose that flexibility, not only for the employer, but these employees that are looking to that flexibility for why they have these jobs and why they do it. You know, in our industry, which can be someone that's part-time, can be someone that's trying to go back to school, and can be single parents that are making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year off of server jobs that we know of, you know, because they love that flexibility and when they can work. So that's the thing I would be concerned about, is the long-term effects of everyone, you know, if we're just focusing on a few bad actors. Right.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll just say thank you very much for your comments, Scott. And, you know, that's pretty much what I expected. And thank you for your comment at the end there about pointing out that the flexibility goes both ways. I know a lot of people that work in the restaurant industry, and they do it precisely because it's flexible for them too. They can work out with their employer on the times that work around their other job or their other schedule or school or what have you. And I just think that sometimes we use a hammer to do you know, a job that we really need you know, a delicate small screwdriver for. And this is one of those cases where I think that, you know, if you start imposing these regulations on industry, what you're going to get is less freedom for both employers and employees to come up with solutions that work for everyone. And I hate to see that happen, especially since Connecticut is not known for our welcoming attitude toward business as it is, and we want to turn that around. So thank you very much, Scott, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Winkler.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. If I heard your testimony correctly, you believe that most employees in restaurants would prefer flexibility over predictability.
Yeah, that was my testimony, Representative. Good to see you. The vast majority, not just from my testimony, but also in even polls. We haven't done a specific poll in Connecticut, but even on national polls for our industry, that's one of the #1 reasons people get into it is because of the flexibility.
So the bill permits people to, in essence, volunteer for flexibility, volunteer for extra shifts. So from your perspective, most people would volunteer because most people want the flexibility and they could go into that pool and take extra shifts and all that stuff. What I'm concerned about are, let's say, the single parent with a child who has to arrange for daycare and needs predictability. Can you think of being able to provide flexibility for the few who, predictability for the few who want it versus flexibility for most who would volunteer?
No, Representative, I think it's a great question. I think that's why I want to be here today and always testifying and talking with you guys. I think at the end of the day, we do have many single parents with, that have to worry about daycare, and that's putting their schedule out there and being flexible up front with all of this and being predictive to be like, hey, I can't work in these times. Like that's that upfront, like, hey, these are the issues. And then things come up. Don't get me wrong. We have a snow day, half day today with my own kids. There's that piece that we always have to talk about, but that's the relationship that the employer and the employee have to build, that we have, and keeping the flexibility, but also being predictive ahead of time as much as you can be. But also, if it doesn't, I think we just talked about this, it's not just for the employee, but also for the employer. It goes both ways, for them to be able to be flexible to help move their schedule around, for them, but also to the employer. If we're looking at a snowstorm, let's just say in Vernon right now, and we have all those restaurants that were planning on being open tonight with their staffs, but now they're saying, oh, I still have to pay them, and I'm not going to generate any revenue because no one's going to come out. Like, you're putting the burden on the employer that, and it's their loss. Tough that it snowed 6 inches, to you as a restaurant out there, because of the way that this bill would be written. So that's where I think we have to be understanding of the flexibility for both the employer and the employee to make it work on both sides.
So people take a job wherever they can find one, and they put up with whatever they have to put up with to keep the job. And they're quite welcome to come here and try to get some of the most onerous aspects of the job eliminated. But you talk about the give and take between the worker and the employer, but that's not an equal relationship. An employer can simply, do as they please, period. Yes, no, maybe. The worker has no power. And in the working relationships I've seen like that, there's really not much of a give and take. It might happen sometimes, but usually it's yes or no. And so do you think that there's this cooperative spirit between management and labor at almost all restaurants where, the ease of operation of the employer is sacrificed for cooperation with the needs of the workers all the time?
Listen, Representative, I know I guess I can speak for my industry. I know this bill affects a lot of different businesses, but knowing the majority of our restaurants and the relationship that they have with their staffs is different than any other industry I've ever seen. And I do believe that there is give and take. There has to be. Because at the end of the day, if you have, in our industry, if you've got a workforce that doesn't want to work for the owner, you have awful customer service and your restaurant tanks. So it matters that you're flexible and you're open and you're a great operator, which we have many and throughout our state in your own district. So I welcome those conversations to talk to servers and bartenders and have those conversations about why they're in the industry, why do they work at that restaurant. It's not so much that it's just that, oh, that was their job, that's what they're going to take. It's also the opportunity because of what that experience is like. Now, don't get me wrong, there's obviously opportunity, there's bad acting situations, but for the most part, I speak for the hospitality industry and know of what our owners have gone through the last 11 and a half months. The hardest calls I made throughout December was without a federal stimulus. People were losing money and closing their doors, that we saw a record number of restaurant closures over that time. And all the phone calls I took was they didn't want to shut their doors, even though they were bleeding out money, because they didn't want to let their people go a second time. There was the one thing they were like, not around the holidays. I can't do that. I can't do that to them. And that wasn't one call. That was hundreds and hundreds of calls. So to say that they don't care about their employees to be flexible, I think is short-sighted overall of how our industry views, our staffs and what it means to us in hospitality.
Final question. In the hierarchy of things, do you think the relationship the worker has with the manager or the possibility of tips is the prime determinant of service?
Can you re-ask the question, Representative? Can you re-ask it one more time?
Do you believe that a server's attitude towards their boss is more important than tips in determining the level of service to the customer?
I think the entire situation of where they're in has to do with their experience. Now, they could say, oh, it's that table, that tips. But if they don't want to be there or whatever else, and they're very good at their job, that's the one thing too that you talk about that servers don't get. If they're talented and they're not happy where they are, guess what? They bounce and go somewhere else and make more money. And that happens all the time. And that leaves the employer left high and dry. So say that they didn't have that flexibility, but that's the other piece to this is they want to enjoy the experience and the team that they're working for in that owner, in that manager, not also for the guests that came in that night. It all plays a role here, which I think is important to understand that these people that are servers and bartenders, our national average is $25 an hour. Let's not lose sight of that. They're not making minimum wage. And if they are, let's go down that road and have that conversation about what restaurants are breaking the law. But these people are they're the highest paid in our industry, the front of house workers. And so understanding that piece to this is also part of that conversation that we need to make sure we're talking about as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I just wanted to highlight a couple of points you made. This predictive scheduling would apply to dishwashers and bussers and back of house servers as well. Would it not?
It would apply. I'm assuming it would apply to every employee, right? And not just in our industry, but yes. So right. Yes, obviously we were focusing on the server bartender for the questions, but yes, it would apply to back of house as well.
Okay, so some of these are really the lowest earning workers in our industries that, to Representative Winkler's point, don't have equal standing and power in terms of their capacity to just be denied shifts or be laid off or whatever. They, especially those low wage workers, they're really dependent on the job to earn the money that they can. Would you agree with that?
I definitely agree that we need to continue to help on both sides. I think we just need to, as we work together, it needs to work for all. Don't get me wrong, but understand even during this pandemic, the people that have been the most flexible and be worked to help has been the relationships with back of house and trying right. to make, and get them more involved and being flexible for them and their own challenges that they face throughout it.
Right, and I think one of the things that this pandemic and the catastrophic hit it's had on the restaurant industry is it's exposed the systemic problems, lack of childcare, publicly funded, publicly invested in resource, so that families could do the half a snow day and that kind of thing and manage, and I think it's especially hard on those very, very low wage, vulnerable workforce to not have the option. And I did want to describe that we were talking about an opt-in language for folks to take on extra shifts or be that on-call person, but that there be a baseline of commitment from the owner to provide a predictive work week schedule. And we can talk about what makes sense. What's that sweet spot in terms of days, notice or ahead of notice to understand that this is what I'm planning my childcare, my work week, my family around. So I think there's some opportunity there. The other thing is systemically, I kind of object to the bad actors because I think it's just the system, not necessarily the intent of any employer to exploit any of those workers. But I think we have a system that simply does. So I wouldn't characterize them as bad actors. I would just characterize them as, a system that is trying to survive the best it can and needs more resources. Like you said, needs more federal funding to stay afloat, to keep people, from being laid off and businesses closing. So I agree with you there. We need much more robust investment in.
Excuse me, Rep. Hughes?
Yeah.
Just 3 minutes. Please conclude your
Okay.
remarks.
Thank you. I just wondered if there was a compromise, Mr. Dolch, what would the timely, instead of 2 weeks, what would that be? What would that look like for you?
I think that's, I wasn't prepared today. I was just prepared on talking on 2 sentences of a bill, but I think I've always been open to be a part of that conversation with your guys' team of what works, what's unique about hospitality maybe versus a couple other industries that have, making sure that, and that's, I want to make sure everyone's clear on that. I'm always willing to have those conversations. I don't know what a perfect sweet spot is right now, but let's have that conversation. Let's keep, but I'm looking at a piece of legislation that had 2 sentences in it, when I came into my testimony. So like I had to go off of what 19's bill because it said fair work week and then you see on call. So like, it was also hard for me, even coming into this hearing, to try to, just giving my take from an industry side as best as I can, but I'm always available, representative, to talk to you individually or this group on how it affects our industry and how we can help.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your testimony. Thank you, Scott.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Representative Ritigliano.
Thank you, Representative. Hi, Scott. How you doing? There's a lot to unpack there a little bit, so I think I'll reserve not commenting on a lot of things. Dishwashers are usually entry-level positions, and I don't know one manager that would want to go do the dishes. They have more power than I think people think. Just to provide some context, can you tell me, and the committee who may not know, how many restaurants have closed in the past year during the pandemic permanently?
I've had over 600 closed permanently and another over 100 have temporarily closed throughout the winter, and that number continues to grow by the day.
So we're at 700 currently.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know at the height of the pandemic, how many employees are in the industry and how many were laid off?
So I mentioned a little bit before, we had 160,000 food service employees, about 10% of the state's workforce, over 85,000 went on unemployment in the first 2 weeks of the pandemic. We've seen some growth spikes back. We've got it up to about 127,000 and 160 in October. As I know, I did a couple media articles. People were talking about that's great news, but we knew that we unfortunately lost phase 3, went back to phase 2.1, and the winter hit. We lost outdoor dining, and we saw a drastic decline back in our industry, and which was hard to face. So we're trying to do everything we can to get our capacity limitations up and try to get these people back to work. At the end of the day, that's what we want. We want to get back to that 160 number and get our restaurants hopefully to reopen or try to get back to those numbers. I think they're talking about it could take 4 to 5 years is realistically our industry nationally is the full recovery. In some of the inner cities, New Haven, so I see Representative Porter on or Hartford, they're saying it could take 8 to 10, which is scary for an industry trying to recover and what that could mean for our city, our urban centers. So
I appreciate that answer. I appreciate you sharing that with the committee. I think even though people know, I don't know if everybody knows how hard the industry which was one of the few growing industries in the state of Connecticut over the past 10 years, has been hit by the pandemic, and the people that work in it and that have invested in it have been, and really what makes some of our downtown so vibrant has been really affected and kind of destroyed a little bit, and how long it may take to come back. So I appreciate your answer, Scott. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And hello, Scott. How are you?
I'm good, representatives. I know I haven't seen you in person in a while. Hope you're doing all right.
I know. Good to see you. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions real quick, and really short. Can you just give me the number of restaurants in total in the state of Connecticut?
8,500.
So there's 8,500 restaurants in total.
Yeah.
And then how many of those restaurants do you guys represent?
We now have almost 2,000 members, thanks to the pandemic has really made an impact on that. And also we have access now to over about 4,800 to 5,000 of them through our communications. They haven't paid us dues yet, but as you can imagine, they've been looking to us as a resource. So our voice is definitely throughout the state is more so than ever.
Okay. And the 2,000 members that you have represent about what percentage of the industry?
What is that, about 6%, I think it is, 25%. But and just give a caveat to that, when you guys hear the 8,500 number, it's about 45 to 5,000 that are independent sole proprietors. We have a lot of Starbucks, we have a lot of Dunkin' Donuts, even though they're franchisees. We have a lot of the franchises. So even that's the scary on the 600 number, and actually 700 with the temporary closures. Those are really out of about 4,500, because what it was is I went to the 5 largest food distributors that we work with. They don't work with national accounts. That was their numbers of what they've lost in accounts. So that's where the scary truth is, where I've had some media say to me, oh, it's only 600 to 8,500. It's actually about 700 now out of like 4,500. So, and those are the people that are the sole proprietors, the individual, restaurant owners is the one that's been the most vulnerable, and my biggest worry of trying to get through this pandemic. But sorry to stop your questioning, Representative. Just try to give you some background.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your answers, and thank you for taking time to be with us today, Scott. Good. It's great seeing you.
Good seeing you too. Hope you're well. Hope you're supporting your local restaurants down there in New Haven.
Oh, you already know. Supporting them and their workers. Thank you.
Good.
Mr.
Love to hear it.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir, for your testimony. The next person we have is Allison. Please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this. Mirswa?
Yep, that's right. So good afternoon, Chair Sanchez, and Representative Porter, ranking members, Senator Sampson, and Representative Aora, as well as honorable members of the Labor and Public Employees Committee. My name is Allison Mirzwa, and I am speaking today to support SB 668, an act concerning the Fair Work Week schedule. I am currently a graduate student at the University of Connecticut School of Social Work, and I am a resident of Hartford. The unchecked on-call scheduling that is being used on working people throughout Connecticut is damaging to the lives of the employees. Employees bear the emotional and financial burden of this scheduling system. On-call workers bear the burden of rescheduling their day and finding childcare at a moment's notice. From my own personal experience, the sleep disturbance and stress that I felt working an on-call job was unsustainable. I am one of the lucky few who have a strong support system and a safety net that was there to help me when I was out of a job. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone is given the option to value their personal health and well-being over a paycheck. Without a limit to the amount of on-call time, employers can constantly disrupt the lives of their employees and use the fear of being fired or hours being cut as a tactic to control them. For this and many previously mentioned reasons, I urge you to support SB 668, an act concerning a fair work week schedule. Thank you for your time and consideration and allowing me to speak publicly to all of you today.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Julie Bachman.
Yes, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? So good afternoon. My name is Julie Boatman, and I am Director of Job Quality at the National Women's Law Center. I really appreciate the opportunity to testify before this committee, where your recent work to enact paid family and medical leave and a $15 minimum wage will undoubtedly help reduce the disparities that women so often face in accessing good paying jobs and essential benefits. But unstable, unpredictable, and inadequate work hours continue to impose high costs on working people, their families, and the broader economy. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, people across Connecticut, disproportionately women and people of color, working in essential but low-paying jobs, often had little notice of their work schedules, experienced last-minute cancellations that deprived them of vital income, and were given part-time hours when they needed full-time work to support their families. And today, many of those who continue to work also face increasingly volatile and inadequate hours, along with new caregiving challenges posed by school and childcare closures. And when women's jobs don't allow them to balance their responsibilities at work with those caregiving obligations, when they can't secure childcare that allows them to work knowing their children are getting the care they need to thrive, when they can't get the rest or the medical treatment that they need to keep themselves and their families healthy and productive, when they can't commit to classes to advance in their careers or even a second job to make ends meet, it is hard and sometimes impossible for women to get and keep good jobs and advance in the workplace. But as you've heard today, that's exactly what many women working in retail, restaurant, and hospitality jobs in Connecticut are facing. And these barriers are one of the reasons that gender wage gaps persist in Connecticut, gaps that are particularly wide for women of color and women who are moms, and for moms who are women of color most of all. In Connecticut, Black women who are moms and work full-time make 47 cents, and Latina moms just 41 cents compared to white non-Hispanic fathers, gaps that are larger than the national average. Ensuring that women working in the industries in which volatile schedules are most widespread have access to a fair work week is an essential next step to close that gap, these gaps. And that is what Senate Bill 668 has the potential to do. In my written testimony, I have detailed the provisions that can give working people in Connecticut greater stability, predictability, and input into their work schedules, all of which are already on the books in cities across the country, as well as the state of Oregon, covering more than 2 million working people today. And new research shows these laws are working. Researchers who monitored working parents in Emeryville in California found that those covered by the local Fair Workweek policy reported substantial declines in last-minute schedule changes and significant improvements in family well-being. And while scheduling practices that ignore workers' needs result in more turnover and absenteeism, studies show fair work schedules lead to more productive and committed employees and lower turnover. So this bill really presents an opportunity for Connecticut to build a service sector after the pandemic that is far stronger than what came before. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Boatman, for your testimony. I have no questions. I just really appreciate you giving such a great outline of the importance of this legislation and why it matters, and actually honing in on the disparities of who it actually disproportionately impacts, and that it is going to help close all of the things that you talked about. We're working all day, every day on pay equity issues and making sure that, you know, we're trying to bridge the gap between women and what men make, white men. But this will go a long way. And I just really appreciate you coming behind Scott, because, you know, that's not what we heard from him. You know, we heard that the workers are happy, they appreciate this. And the workers that have come here today have actually testified in contrary to what he stated. So there is some validity, I think, in the people who have the lived experience and that are being directly impacted. So I just really appreciate you solidifying the point that has been made all day by workers who have come before us to say that they support this bill, they need this bill, and it will actually help to level the playing field and make that thing we call a shared sacrifice, really shared. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Representative.
much.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Up
Thank you.
next, we have Steve Kennedy. The floor is yours, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Representative Sanchez. Okay. Representative Porter, Senator Kushner, Senator Sampson, and Representative Aurora, and the distinguished members of the Committee on Labor and Public Employees. My name is Steve Kennedy. I'm a resident of Fairfield, and I'm the president of the Yukon Law Chapter of the People's Parity Project. I'd like to express our support for HB 6343, an act ensuring fair employee protections for gig workers. So even before the pandemic, about 17,000 to 35,000 Connecticut residents relied on gig work as their primary source of income. And since the onset of the pandemic, even more have turned to gig work, and they've become lifelines for our communities. However, as we've learned today, what many of us who've come to rely on these workers may not have been aware of is that if they're injured on the job, they're not entitled to workers' compensation. They don't qualify for minimum wage. If they're fired for their race, gender, religion, disability, or any other characteristic, they're not entitled to protections. And this is because, despite their central role in their employer's business models, they're classified as independent contractors. So under current law, one of the factors that make a worker more likely to be counted as an independent contractor is if they work outside of the employer's physical offices, which basically acts as a carve-out for gig platform companies. And it's a factor that simply doesn't fit in the modern economy. So for example, I work 2 part-time jobs. And for those jobs, I work from home and for the most part set my own hours, but I'm an employee. If my employer hires an electrician, they'll be working in the office, but they'll still be a contractor. So especially as we've seen in the last year, the location of your work is not really relevant to whether you're an employee or not. So what we're suggesting is to follow the example of Massachusetts, which since 2004 has used a version of the same test that we're using, except it removed any reference to work location. So this ensures proper protections for more workers, such as drivers and others working from home, while still allowing for classic examples of contracting outside the usual scope of an employer's business. Also, like Massachusetts and other states, we suggest that Connecticut extend the use of the test explicitly to all employment determinations, rather than only unemployment and wage and hour claims. So as I mentioned, gig workers don't qualify for workers' compensation, for family and medical leave, anti-discrimination protections, or even basic workplace safety protections. And our view is that an employee is an employee, and the same test should apply for eligibility for all of those protections, pursuant to any other requirements in each statute. We believe it's past time to eliminate this carve-out for out-of-state gig platforms from a law that already applies to most of our local businesses and ensures that many of Connecticut workers are fairly compensated, have a safe work environment. At PPP, we believe that our workers deserve fair treatment under the law, our businesses deserve fair competition, and the state deserves a proper framework for employee protections in the modern economy. So we would encourage your support of this bill, and thank you for your consideration of this important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to see you here. We've had an opportunity to speak a little bit about some of the challenges of gig workers, and I think that you have a lot to contribute to this. I'm happy to see that UConn has a project like yours to really study these issues. I think we've learned from a number of people before us today that have really helped our dialogue and discussion to understand it better. I just wanted to check with you and see if there was anything else. I know you've done some work around the, particularly around the network drivers, the Uber Lyft drivers, and looked at that issue as well. And I was wondering, we're gonna have testimony on that at a later around a specific bill at a later public hearing. But I wondered if you were going to be coming back to testify on that. We can wait till then, or if you had something you wanted to add to that.
So, not knowing the specifics of that bill, I couldn't really speak to that. But I mean, depending on, if it's something where we, our research could offer some, some guidance there, we would certainly come back to testify at that time. But it does kind of depend on what the bill looks like, just because I don't know what the details are.
Sure, I appreciate that, but I hope you'll take a look at it, because it would be helpful to hear from you on that as well. And it's good to see you.
Definitely, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony, Mr. Kennedy. I wanted to know, the opponents of this bill suggested it's a radical change based on the impact on gig platform companies. But is this any different from the standard that we are already applying to most of our local businesses?
Thank you, Representative. The test that this change would subject the gig companies to is the same one that currently applies to all of our local businesses who don't have that option of keeping their employees out of their physical offices. So for example, we heard this earlier, but if you have a pizza delivery driver and a Grubhub driver, they're both performing essentially the same service, but your local pizza place is paying into unemployment insurance. They provide workers' compensation insurance, among other things, and Grubhub doesn't, and we all end up paying the difference.
Right. So, and you did mention that some of the things gig workers currently are ineligible for, and I think it's unemployment, minimum wage, overtime, workers' comp, family medical leave, paid sick leave, anti-discrimination practices, workplace safety requirements. That's a lot. So, are any workers other than gig workers affected by this change?
So there would potentially be some other workers impacted, but most contracting work is going to remain contracting. I mean, basically, the rest of the ABC test, which is, again, already in place, it assesses factors such as how much control an employee has over a worker and whether the worker is in business for her or himself. Basically, how integrated the worker's duties are into the usual business of the employer. I mean, under our proposal, these factors are still going to remain. It simply removes that carve out for companies that are able to keep their employees out of their physical place of business, basically.
Okay. So does anything in this bill require any company to bring a worker on as a full-time employee or mandate anything about the flexibility of their scheduling?
No. So just like any other part-time employee, I mean, eligibility for certain benefits is going to depend on factors in addition to whether they're an employee or a contractor. So, as an example, we heard from Mr. Dolch just earlier about the importance of flexibility within the restaurant industry. Those workers that he's talking about are all employees. They're not contractors, but they still have that flexibility within the industry. And nothing in this bill would restrict that for the gig companies. If people want to work, come and work for 5 hours or something like that, they can still do that. But they're not going to be excluded from something like workplace safety protections. Different benefits will depend on how much they work. So family medical leave, for example, you have to work on average about 25 hours a week to qualify for that. So your 5 hour a week gig driver is still not going to qualify for that. But something like if they're injured on the job, they can still be compensated for it.
Right. Thank you for that. And my last question through you, Mr. Chair. Do any other states use the same test that this bill proposes?
Thank you. Yes, they do. So, we heard earlier a little bit about, there's kind of like the boogeyman of this, the bill that passed in California. But, as I mentioned, Massachusetts has used this exact same bill for almost 20 years now. We also use a very similar test aside from the place of business piece of it. So this, I don't think we're reinventing the wheel here. We're right next door. They're using the exact same test. So.
And we're actually talking about doing something that they've been doing for decades that actually works, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Well, thank you again for your time today, for your testimony and your expertise around this piece of legislation. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Steve, for your testimony. Tell us about how this would align with the federal law.
So federal law is, there I'm not so expert on because our research was focused on, on Connecticut, but federal law uses, in some cases, a similar test. Generally, it focuses mostly on the degree of control that an employer has. Again, I'm not an expert. To my knowledge, the place of business is not necessarily used. It really looks mostly at the degree of control.
Great. And through you, Mr. Chair, another question is about this carve out. Who does it largely benefit? Like if we eliminate that carve out, then would those big companies be basically putting those resources into Connecticut's economic workforce and economy, I guess, is my question. Who would contribute those? protections?
Sure. So that would, most of the companies that benefit from this particular provision are the ones, like I said, who have employees working solely outside of their place of business. So, mostly you are talking about people like Uber or Grubhub, things like that, who right now aren't paying into the same protections that our local businesses are. So, as we alluded to a little bit earlier, there's not, we don't see a huge impact on some of the local businesses that are already, needing to comply with this. Most, if you have like a restaurant doing deliveries, they're not keeping their drivers out of the building, so like they're not going to fall within this carve out. Their drivers are still most likely going to be employees, while someone like Grubhub can leave them as independent contractors.
Great, that's helpful to think about this. And also, do you think that, like Massachusetts, will those companies that now basically have this carve out, this benefit, I suppose, in Connecticut of not having to pay those resources like the local businesses, will they raise their rates, you think, to customers?
You have to ask them. What we saw in California is that they say that they will, but again, this law has been in place in Massachusetts for almost decades now, and at least I'm not aware of say Massachusetts Uber rates being higher than Connecticut's, outside of just their usual demand algorithm or something like that. So,
right.
To me, that seems like very speculative, if not doubtful.
Right, because like you said, you alluded to, thank you, Mr. Chair, is it's based on algorithm of density and use and frequency and volume, right?
Right. I would imagine that if they are paying more into say unemployment or something like that, it's possible they'll pass some of that on to us. I couldn't say, but again, the current system allows them not to pay that, which is disadvantaging both their drivers and their restaurants who are acting as their competition. So, somebody, again, a restaurant can't hire a driver without having to pay for all these things that Uber does not.
Right. So it levels, again, I know I'm out of time, but it levels that playing field with our local businesses.
That's the idea, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Retigliano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, sir. How are you today? I just quick question. So are you saying that everybody that works for Uber, DoorDash, Grubhub in Massachusetts currently is an employee of the company?
So my understanding is that is something that is basically, it's being litigated now. So there are other factors to this test. So if you remove this prong of it, it won't necessarily make these drivers move from being contractors to employees. Again, there are other factors there. So right now, my understanding is that the Massachusetts Department of Labor has determined that they are employees, but the gig platforms are objecting to that, and that still kind of remains to be resolved, is my understanding.
Okay, so I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just trying to learn. So, removing that provision you guys are talking about won't necessarily automatically make them employees.
That's right. It wouldn't automatically make them employees. It would put them on. It would put these companies on a level playing field with the other ones that don't have their employees working outside of the business. So there's still going to be the Department of Labor would be analyzing the degree of control the company has over the work. Whether you would consider this person to be in business for themselves, things like that. So it's not necessarily an automatic switch. That's correct.
I understand. I appreciate your answer. I wasn't advocating one way or another. I was hoping we could look to Massachusetts to see if how things went. But I appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any further questions? Seeing none, Mr. Kennedy, thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Mr. James Burke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To all the members of the Labor and Public Employees Committee, my name is James Burke. I'm the Operations Manager with the Connecticut Working Families Organization. I'm also a City Councilor for the City of New London and a part-time cashier at a locally owned grocery store. And I'm here today to strongly support SB 668, a fair work week schedule. Last year, I made the trip up to Hartford to testify in support of this bill. And since then, I think the pandemic and the economic crisis has made the need for this legislation greater than ever. So I just want to take a moment to talk about on-call scheduling. I've worked at 3 different jobs which have used unfair scheduling practices or on-call scheduling. Many of the times my schedule was posted just a day or 2 prior to me having to show up for the shift. And I've also worked at jobs where I would remain on call, unpaid, waiting for hours for a phone call that would let me know whether I had to come in and work that night or not. As you know, last time I had a job like that, I was 19 years old. I'd get left off the, left on the hook by my employer. It'd be an inconvenience. Today, as a father who's got a mortgage to make, it would be financially debilitating. How would I plan for childcare or healthcare appointments without having advanced knowledge of when I'd be at work? How would I create my family budget when my hours are changed at a moment's notice? So I just wanted to take a moment I was, listening to Mr. Scott Dolch's comments earlier. A lot of it really struck me because I've worked in Connecticut restaurants and I've had experiences like this. He mentioned that they've done national polls, but not polls in Connecticut on flexibility versus predictability. I don't need a poll. I'm a parent and I've been there. When my daughter was born, I left a job in a restaurant where I was a server, making more money to work for a grocery store who would give me a consistent schedule, a set schedule even, so I could know whether or not I could schedule a medical appointment on a Tuesday at 3 o'clock or not. So I could know, whether I needed to get daycare or whether my kid could go spend the day with grandma. So this is just some of my own personal experience and examples of why a fair work week will be beneficial to Connecticut workers and Connecticut employers. When employees are happy, the business does. I've also been a retail manager. And I can tell you what happens when you don't give employees the tools they need to make those healthcare appointments or to get, childcare. What happens is they call out. And then you as a manager are scrambling with an understaffed staff or coming in yourself together because your employee is going to call out. So again, I just wanted to share this is some of my experiences, subjectively on why a fair work week schedule has been beneficial to me when I found employers that have offered it, and why I think every worker in the state of Connecticut deserves it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Counselor, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we have Taylor Vineyards.
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, awesome. Hello, dear members of the committee. My name is Taylor Biniars and I live in Ellington, Connecticut. I actually work in this field, politics, but without a degree, it is tough to find full-time employment, so I often search for jobs that happen to be on call during the off times. I worked a job in the making and selling a product in the manufacturing and beverage service industry. I stand in support and urge you to support Senate Bill 668, an act concerning a fair work week schedule. I'd like to point out that this bill would not actually prohibit the practice of on-call scheduling. Rather, this bill will help stabilize working families by limiting it. When I worked there, I was given 2 types of schedules. I was either told my schedule at the beginning of the week or I was told about it the next day on the present day. Both of those schedules consistently changed. I was often either told that I wasn't needed on said day or cut early into one day, but I was also called in on days when I wasn't scheduled. I felt like I couldn't say no because early on I was asked to, and when I stated in the group chat that I had plans, my plans were questioned harshly by a coworker, the owner's son. When I was told I didn't have to come in the next day, I felt like I could not make plans or even sleep in just in case I was called in, especially due to my close proximity to the location. I drove to work and found out I wasn't needed many times. I was scared every time I had to leave early or come in late due to my therapy, which I always let them know about in advance. My mental health suffered greatly and I had to call out sometimes because of my mental health getting worse, causing my lack of sleep and affecting my physical health as well. I also received several overdraft fees due to automatic bills being taken out of my account due to some of my hours being shorter than expected, which coupled with the fact that I wasn't making a living wage at the time made it worse. If I had to cancel a therapy appointment, then I would have had a $75 fee. To put that in perspective, last year when I learned about this testifying day and canceled my therapy appointment to testify, I was within 1 hour of a cancellation fee. This bill would have helped me by being more financially consistent, but it also would have helped my mental health more by not making me suffer significantly. I do not have nor want children, but I cannot imagine working an on-call job if I did. I strongly support S. Bill 668. I hope this committee and Connecticut lawmakers will too, and will vote favorably this year to empower Connecticut's hourly workers by limiting abusive scheduling practices. Because a business that cannot treat their employees with the respect and dignity that they deserve should not be allowed to be one anymore. I recognize that I'm almost out of time, but I also want to voice my support for SB 666. When I heard Alyssa, I believe her name was, testify earlier today, and she mentioned the fact that they are only given a handful of sessions as a first responder, that terrified me. As somebody who's been in therapy for over a decade, a handful of sessions barely establishes a foundation for trauma. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Winkler. Oh, you raised your hand, so I don't know.
Okay. I know of Ms. Biniar. She's next town over. We've communicated. I was just waving without taking up time, but thank you for testifying. A pleasure to see you.
Hi, Mike. Nice to see you too.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Hughes.
Thank you, Taylor, for your testimony. My question is, what would be a good baseline predictability in terms of between 2 weeks and the day of or the day before? What would be a fair compromise in your experience?
While I do think that the 2 weeks, which is what I believe is listed in the bill, if I'm not wrong, is the best option. If there was a compromise, I think 1 week would be good, because when you talk about doctor's appointments, there are doctors that range. Mine, for example, my therapist ranges from 24 hours notice, but I know there are some doctors that take 48 or 72 hours notice, and that's 3 days. So I do believe that if there needs to be a compromise on the amount of time, that a week sounds fair, but I do think that 2 weeks is the best option.
I agree with you too. The 2 week is standard notice for, developing a life around, and especially in this sort of hybrid, we need a lot of notice to be able to arrange for other responsibilities in childcare and so forth. But I just wanted your input on that, because like you say, so many folks are beholden to their job, and they're at the behest of that schedule, and that's not fair to the workers, and it's not fair to our economy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions? Thank you, Taylor, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Up next, thank you. Up next, we have Merrill Gay.
Representative Sanchez, Senator Kushner, Representative Porter, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of Senate Bill 668. My name is Merrill Gay, and I am trying to get a light turned on. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Early Childhood Alliance, a statewide membership organization committed to the goal that all children in Connecticut grow up healthy, safe, and ready for lifelong success. I'm here today to testify in support of the concept of giving employees, but particularly parents, predictable hours. Parents of young children need to know what their schedule is going to be so that they can arrange for childcare. And beyond that very real concern about childcare, when you don't know whether you're going to be working on any given day, you really don't know how much you're going to have in your paycheck and whether you'll be able to pay your bills. When you don't know what your hours are going to be, it makes it very hard to get a second job to be able to pay the bills. When you don't know what your hours are, It's hard to make plans to go back to school, to improve your skills and be able to get a better job. And for those who have young children, when you have erratic hours, it's very hard to even find a spot in formal childcare because we have a shortage of childcare. And what childcare provider wants to hold a spot open for you when you might need it on Tuesdays, but sometimes you're going to need it just on Wednesdays, and some weeks you're going to need it 4 days out of the week. You need to give people some predictability to be able to make those kinds of arrangements. And you heard somebody else say it already. I mean, to even have the predictability to know that I can make a doctor's appointment and be able to keep it. Those are just really basic things that people need to have. All of this uncertainty contributes to stress on parents. And we know that's not good for children. Children can sense when their parents are stressed, and that makes kids stressed as well. Stress in the earliest years of life can really change brain chemistry and have lasting impacts on children's ability to learn and develop appropriately. Since the Great Recession, Connecticut lost a lot of its full-time, good-paying jobs. And many of the jobs that came back after the Great Recession, before the pandemic recession, were these lower-skilled part-time jobs. And that really has contributed to families having difficulty making ends meet. And it's jobs in these sectors that tend to rely more on part-time scheduling, having a job, having work for 20 people, but hiring 40 and keeping everybody part-time and keeping everybody just a little bit tenuous about whether or not they're going to get enough hours. Everybody a little hungry so that the boss is really in charge and is able to dictate terms to employees. And when you look at how many people does this affect and who does it affect, it affects the working poor. And just sort of a proxy for those folks, it's the same people who rely on the Care for Kids subsidy. And that is for families with children under 5, that's a quarter of all working families. And it's half of the single moms. It's not all of those people work in these industries that this bill would cover, and not all of them are on-call scheduling, experience on-call scheduling, but it's more families than we know. And we've heard earlier from people talking about the folks wanting flexibility. My experience is that what folks really want is predictability and knowing.
Mr. Gay, your 3 minutes are up. Please conclude your remarks.
I will just wrap up. When things get out of whack like this, it's time for government to put guardrails on the system so that we don't all end up in a ditch. And I just want to finish by saying that we believe in the idea of predictable schedules. The one place where we would ask that there be a carve out if this ends up any different than in the past is that industries where there are legally mandated staffing requirements, particularly childcare, where if you've got 11 kids, you've got to have 2 staff. If you've got 10, it can be 1 staff. That they have to have that flexibility because of those legally mandated staffing requirements. But thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Gay. Great to see you. No questions. Just wanted to thank you for the work that you do on behalf of the parents throughout the state of Connecticut. And I really do appreciate all the valid and salient points you made today regarding this legislation. So thank you very much, and it's great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Meryl, for your testimony. Be well.
Okay, thank you.
Next up that we have to speak is Cameron Champlin. Sir, you're muted still.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Representative Porter, Senator Kushner, Representative Aurora, Senators Sampson, and members of this committee. My name is Cameron Champlin, and I represent Plumbers and Pipefitters Local Union 777. The local is comprised of approximately 3,500 men and women that reside and work in the state of Connecticut. This testimony is in opposition to Senate Bill 662. Although we do believe this bill was well-intentioned to ease the burden of requiring workers to take an OSHA 10 course every 5 years, but this requirement addresses very important safety issues, especially in the construction trades. It helps to decrease accidents on job sites, which in turn saves time missed from work, therefore saves money for workers' compensation claims, and reduces workers' compensation rates paid by contractors. For these reasons, we ask that you vote against this bill to move forward. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just really quickly, Mr. Champlin, can you just elaborate a little bit on the pushback that we're hearing from you in regard to what the detriment of this legislation would be? Because it is being presented with good intent. So can you help me to understand that a little better, please?
Yes, and as I said, I do think it was put forward with good intentions. I just believe that in the construction trade, you know how dangerous it is, and people get complacent when they go to work every day and things go fine, but then there are accidents. For instance, at the West Haven Veterans Hospital, a short time ago, we lost one of our members, Local 777, a pipe fitter. Also, one of their maintenance people got killed with him. So these are the type of things that could it have been, it's an accident, could it have been avoided? I don't know all the details, but there are other accidents that occur on job sites regularly. And I just think by having it every 5 years, it reminds people of how important it is to be careful when you're working, be cognizant of what the surroundings are like. And at least in our industry, I believe this would be a detriment for changing it to 10 years.
Thank you for that response. And my last question for you really quickly is, you're saying that you would rather see it done every 5 years as opposed to extending it to 10. Is there anything that you would suggest to us that would compensate or kind of, be used, that we could use instead of the 10-day training to kind of keep people abreast, and maybe even every year, something that's just not requiring the 10-card training? What is it, the 10-card? I want to make sure I'm getting that right.
Yes.
The 10-hour training card validity.
I know it's been 5 years for a long time. If anything, I would say every 2 years or something like that. And maybe it would be just for the construction industry, because as you know, the construction industry is one of the high-risk jobs there is. I know it's out of the top 25 high-risk jobs, 15 of them are in the construction industry. So I would just like to see it, at least don't change it. If anything, change it to where construction people have to go more often.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and your testimony today. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, sir. Thank you so much for your testimony. Up next, we have John Brady.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening to the committee. My name is John Brady. I am a registered nurse, and I am the Executive Vice President of AFT Connecticut. And I'm here to testify in favor of SB 660, which would extend workers' compensation for mental health care to all workers. Many of our 30,000 members are essential workers, and they've been working throughout the pandemic. Among them, probation officers, all of our educators, and our healthcare workers. And I'd like to talk just for a minute about the healthcare workers. Over the past year, I have spent hour after hour on the phone with leaders of locals at different hospitals who have called me because they needed someone to speak to about what they were hearing from their members at the hospitals, and they needed somebody to debrief with. What they've been telling me is that telling me about nurses who were working 12-hour shifts, who at the end of that 12-hour shift would get extended for another 4 hours because there was nobody to take their place. They told me about nurses and other healthcare workers working these long shifts without sometimes even the chance to get off the floor, maybe go get a soda and just take a mental break. They told me about the fear that their members had of contracting COVID, and even worse, of possibly bringing that home to their families. And they told me of the toll it was taking of their members dealing with death after death after death of their patients. And sometimes they were the only one there in the last hours of that patient's life because of the COVID restrictions on visitors. I've also been on calls with leaders from across the country, and they've told me stories about doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals who seem to be dealing with these stresses in an okay manner, only later to quietly and tragically take their own life. Hearing these stories was not easy because there was limited what things that I could do. I could listen. But today we can do something. We can provide these healthcare heroes with the mental health care they deserve. We can pass SB 660 and provide them the protection to make them stronger and to make all of us healthier. Thank you for listening to my testimony, and thank you for what you do in the service of the people of Connecticut.
Thank you, and thank you for all that you do. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, and John, it's good to see you here, and thank you for testifying on this issue. I have had the occasion to speak with some nurses here in Danbury, nurses who actually belong to your union, who during the course of speaking with them got very emotional, got very, made it very clear to me from their comments that they were under duress, that things were really serious, that this was serious condition that they were facing. But I know that some of what we have heard, and I wanted you to comment on, is that this is, why would nurses, for instance, or other health professionals suffer from something like PTSD or suffer because they are used to handling death, because they see death in the course of their work, they're trained for it, they prepare for it. So why is this different? And I wonder if you could just address that.
Thanks, Senator. I think that we look at healthcare workers, healthcare professionals, and healthcare professionals look at themselves this way, as people that are very resilient, almost like Superman and Superwoman, and that they can handle all of this and they can handle this. But, from my years of working in an emergency room, there were days when you went home and we said, hug your family when you went home. It affects them more than we are willing to admit it affects us. And they will carry on and they will soldier on. But the care they give is affected by that. Their relationships at home are affected by that. And, in some tragic cases, even their life is affected by that. And when you get into a situation like this pandemic, or a mass casualty situation is another situation like that, it's just one after the other, after the other, after the other. And, there are graphs that you can do on emotional stress. And a marriage or a divorce gets you so many points, and a new job gets you so many points, and the death of a loved one gets you so many points. And you can handle these things, but when they start adding up over a shorter period of time, it becomes overwhelming. And I think that's the difference during the pandemic. I think that's our belief that they've been handling it. We've been handling it well all along, is because we put on a good face.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Any further questions? Seeing none, Mr. Brady, thank you so much for all that you do and your colleagues do. Next, we have a great night. Next, we have Bill Garrity.
Thank you very much, Representative Sanchez. As usual, John Brady stole a lot of my thunder. Good afternoon, Senators Kushner, Representative Porter, and members of the Labor and Public Employees Committee. I'd like to take the opportunity to provide some testimony for Senate Bill 660, an act expanding workers' compensation benefits for mental or emotional impairment suffered by all workers. Again, my name is Bill Garrity. I'm a registered nurse with more than 25 years experience in bedside nursing. I was elected as president of UHP, University Health Professionals, Local 3837, and am serving my third term in that capacity. I'm also the AFT Connecticut Divisional Vice President for Healthcare. As a UHP president, I represent over 2,800 members in that membership. There are multiple people that would have benefited from this type of legislation. And I would like to give you a couple quick situations. I know I've only got 3 minutes. Nurses that I've represented, and one situation that happened to myself, but I'm going to try and be brief. One of my nurses was caring for critically ill patients during the early days of the COVID pandemic. He has been very candid and open about what he went through, what all healthcare workers went through with patients not allowed to have family members with their sick family members and patients. He was having to watch the sickest patients die alone, or he was the only person there. You know, nurses were holding up iPads and tablets and phones so family members could say goodbye. So that's a great, little piece for the question that Senator Kushner just asked. This is not something that we normally had to go through. Actually having to, not have family there when patients' lives were ending. That's not something that we wanted to sign up for. After all that, this nurse then contracted COVID himself. He was already staying away from his family because his wife is also a nurse. So they're trying to separate out and make it safer for the kids. So he's staying in a hotel. And then he develops COVID and they kick him out. They say, you can't stay here. And what we did at that point in time, what the state did was, okay, we're going to put him up in one of the dorm rooms at one of the colleges that, is not working, not going right now. So you've taken this guy who now no longer has his wife. He no longer has his family. He had, for lack of a better term, some bit of comfort in a hotel, and then was thrown into a dormitory by himself because he was the only person who was actually put there. It took a lot of time and effort, and we got him back into the hotel. And it was only for us fighting in the hospital, saying, listen, we signed up for this. We got into an agreement with you guys. If you're not going to help us with this, we'll just pull the contract. And again, one of those things, money talks, and we got him back where he was into a comfortable position. We worked so hard trying to set up and prepare for what would happen. But what was devastating for that nurse, only afterward did you see the damaging effects.
Mr. Garrity, I just want to let you know your 3 minutes has elapsed.
Already? Wow. Okay. So then I won't talk about the second nurse, but not COVID related. I will just say quickly, as an emergency room nurse, we can be surprised anytime we walk into a room. And I can count the number of times I've ended up in a wrestling match with an agitated patient, myself personally, agitated, psychotic, or drunk. And these things do happen, and they happen regularly. I had an episode one time where I had to walk into a room not knowing what I was walking into. The patient was trying to be belligerent and fighting with the nurses. I got in between them. I was chest to chest wrestling with this man before I found out this man had a loaded weapon. This man had a loaded gun in the emergency room. And I was okay because I didn't know about it until after everything was over. I walked by where the police were after the police got there, disarmed him while I was on his chest. When I walked by the room where the police were, they had the weapon out. It was unloaded and 6 bullets were sitting there face up, points facing in the air. At that point in time, my stomach fell to the floor and I ended up taking time after that. I was lucky enough where I work to have resources that were afforded to me. Not everyone is that lucky, and I'm hoping this bill will provide everybody the ability to seek the help they need. Thank you for your time, and I would be happy to try and answer any questions.
Bill, thank you for all that you do in your advocacy. Any questions? Senator Kushner.
Thank you for being alert. I was trying to get to the hand raising and I wasn't getting there quick enough. I did want to thank you, Bill, for testifying today. And I think that your testimony and the testimony of John Brady, it's not what we were expecting or what we were thinking about in terms of, particularly because of the kind of work you do, that you do see death more than most of us. And so the being with someone who has died or seeing death, we assume it's part of your job and really hadn't thought about these other situations that you've clarified. I think particularly being in a hospital where there is the possibility of confronting real violence and seeing the evidence of violent interactions that have resulted in someone losing their life or losing a limb. And I think that's eye-opening for us on this committee. So I don't know if you had said there was another nurse that had an experience that you didn't have time to tell us about, but I'd like to ask you to go ahead and share that story.
For me, that one's actually a little painful because I love this nurse. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman who I've known for more than 20 years. This is someone, and again, we know what we sign up for, but unfortunately, COVID just turned everything upside down. Nurses who were working in clinics ended up needing to be pulled into the hospital and work on patient floors. We had floors that were completely closed because we needed to use them as, lack of a better term, I'm sorry, but dirty COVID units. So there were nurses who they were overwhelmed. And that was this one nurse. She ended up having significant issues, ended up having to go out, ended up seeking help, got help. While she was out getting help, developed COVID at an inpatient setup, ended up coming back after trying to get better. We got her back into the health center with as much help as we could get her, and ended up she couldn't handle it. She retired. So the hospital and the patients lost a nurse that I've known for 20 years. One of the sweetest, most compassionate women I've ever met. And this is the stuff that we can't afford to lose. I've had conversations with a number of individuals talking about, saying that, I know we're not calling it PTSD anymore, as that's an outdated term, but, the nurses and the healthcare providers that are living through this are going to need that help. And the conversation that we've had before, and I heard you say with John, we don't have the ability, the older term was, you can't fill from an empty cup. Every time these things happen, it takes a little bit of our soul. And when there's just nothing left, they're walking away. And I've had far too many of my healthcare workers walk away. Thank you.
Well, thank you for telling that and sharing that story. We certainly know that there's been for a long time a shortage of nurses, and so having people walk away is just making this an even harder situation. So I really appreciate you being here today and sharing your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What else? So again, thank you so much for your testimony. Up next, we have Marco Correa.
Thank you for all you do.
Likewise.
Hello, good evening, Labor Committee, Senators, the citizens of Connecticut, other representatives. I'm here to provide testimony in support of Bill SB 666. Again, my name is Marco Correa. I'm 39 years old. I'm writing this statement in regards to including frontline correctional professionals, EMS, and dispatchers into the PTSD bill being proposed in our state legislature. I have 14 years in the Connecticut Department of Correction. I have worked in the capacity of a correctional officer, lieutenant, and now a captain. I have worked in a total of 4 different correctional facilities in various levels of security, large open dorm compounds to cell facilities such as large prisons, and finally in the county jail setting. Through my years in corrections, I have been physically assaulted on multiple occasions, from hand-to-hand combat with an inmate to objects being thrown at me. Also during these years, I, along with many other staff, have been exposed to inmates causing self-inflicted injuries, suicides, inmates ingesting foreign objects or inserting those objects into themselves to cause harm, violent inmate assaults, and assaulting each other, inmate manipulation, and including bodily fluids being thrown at staff, and inmates continuously threatening my life and my family's life, as well as my colleagues. We become hypervigilant in our daily duties inside, and unfortunately, this is difficult to just shut off when we get home. I have changed as a person because of my job. I have become numb to violence. I have become numb to people. Yes, I took the job, however, you really don't understand what it encompasses until you are in those boots and the years go on with the continued stress. I find myself going home, speaking to my wife and kids as if they were in the institution. I have issues trusting others. I must be in control of every situation, and at a moment's notice, I do snap. I also have seen many staff fall deep into alcohol and drug abuse, high divorce rates, and ultimately suicide, all to escape the thoughts of the situations inside of those facilities. I've sought help on my own, which was not easy because I have come to a point a few years ago that left me in a bad mental and emotional state. I was working in a negative environment, dealing with those other personal issues with no positive outlook. After seeking help with the Employee Assistance Program, I was diagnosed with acute stress and panic disorder, which I'm still dealing with today, but with help. This is not easy to say, as I cannot see myself as weak-minded in the line of work I do. The bill includes correctional professionals, would not put an end to my individual related PTSD issues, but it will cause it to be recognized and hopefully help others that may be in a worse mental and emotional state than I was. I hope this bill would make looking for help much easier. I'm a proud correctional professional and will continue to do my duties as a first responder behind the wall until the day I'm able to retire and hopefully shut off the hypervigilance and be normal once again. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Testimony and service, sir. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Correa, for your, tell me your last name. I don't want to butcher it.
It's Correa.
Correa. Thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you for your service and what you do at the department. I want to ask you, I know this is very much needed. You know, I have family members and friends that do the work you've done. Some of them have since retired. I've seen the impact of this work up close and personal. And how many of your fellow colleagues do you think would take advantage of this bill if passed into legislation?
Well, I can tell you that on my shift alone at the facility I currently work, we discuss it among supervisors almost on a daily basis. So I have a feeling because it's recognized amongst us, I think people would search out the opportunity to get help. The problem we're seeing is getting that help, and it's difficult to receive that help. You know what I mean? It's tough to find. I contacted EAP. I was able to get an avenue, but some individuals, they might not be as easy. It might be too late for some of those guys. That's the problem. I think it needs to be easier to find those avenues for those staff.
I agree.
I hope that answered your question.
It does. Thank you. And I think it needs to be easier, not only to find, but to access the resources. And I definitely know that, you know, you guys, not only do you need it, you want it. So that is the effort being made here with putting this legislation through to include you all to be covered. Because I think when you're well, you do your job well. And it impacts the inmates, it impacts the community in which you serve.
Yes.
And I think that it would just go a long way, you know, to making that a much better environment, you know, to work in and be housed in if that's your position. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us this evening.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I wish you all the best. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir, again.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Next, we have Nathan Schaffner. I see Nathan here on the Zoom meeting. Nathan, are you there? I think we'll go back to Nathan. The next person we have is Rosa Franco. I also see Rosa Franco. Oh, there she is. You're on mute. There you go.
Hi, good afternoon. Okay. Hi, good afternoon. Buenas tardes a todo el comité de trabajo. Mi nombre es Rosa Franco. Gracias por escuchar mi testimonio. Hoy en apoyo del proyecto de ley de volver al trabajo, SB 658. Durante casi 14 años trabajé en el turno de noche en McDonald's de la plaza de servicio de Darien Northbound, en la I-95. Yo era confiable, buena trabajadora, nunca falté, nunca llegué tarde, inclusive llegué a trabajar cuando mi niña la pequeña la operaron. Nunca llegué tarde al trabajo, nunca hubo una mala responsabilidad de mí. En junio del 2019, mis compañeros y yo nos empezamos a organizar con la 32BJ. Empecé a hacer la voz para mejorar el salario, las prestaciones, el trato en el trabajo. Pero tuvimos algunas victorias, pero el invierno pasado, el Departamento del Trabajo llegó a un acuerdo con George Mitchell, el dueño de la franquicia de McDonald's, y nos empezaron a ver que nos estaban pagando por el mínimo del sueldo estándar. Pero cuando COVID llegó, en marzo, todo el turno fue desaparecido. A varios de mis compañeros y a mí nos dieron layoffs, y cuando volvieron a llamar a la gente de regreso, empezaron a contratar gente nueva y nos dejaron afuera. Ellos limpiaron la casa, o sea que toda la gente que estaba pidiendo sus derechos, mejorar el salario, el trato laboral, nos echaron afuera. Ahora estamos en una junta laboral, estamos confiando en la justicia, de que todo salga bien. Es un juicio complicado, pero yo creo en la justicia y espero que todo salga a nuestro favor, porque no hemos roto la ley, estamos haciendo todo lo correcto. Muchas gracias.
Hi, this is Frank Stoltz. I'm going to roughly translate Rosa's testimony. I'm sorry, I had technological troubles myself. She's saying, good afternoon, members of the Labor Committee. My name is Rosa Franco. Thank you for hearing my testimony today in support of the recall bill, SB 658. For almost 14 years, I worked the overnight shift at McDonald's at the Darien Northbound Service Plaza on I-95. I was a good employee. I was very dependable. I worked on Christmas for many years, missing the time with my 3 daughters, including my youngest, who has special needs. Once I even had to work the same day, one of my daughters had an operation. In 2019, together with my coworkers in 32BJ, I began to raise my voice for better pay, benefits, and treatment. We protested outside the service plaza. We appeared in newspapers and on the TV, and we won some victories. Last winter, the Department of Labor came to an agreement with the McDonald's owner, George Mitchell, to give us back pay because he was paying us less than the standard wage which we were owed. But when COVID hit in March, the entire night shift was laid off. From one day to the next, my job was gone. When the store began rehiring in May, 3 of my coworkers and I were never recalled. Instead, Mitchell's McDonald's hired new workers. With the help of 32BJ, the four of us took our case to the National Labor Relations Board. The NLRB studied our case and then charged Mitchell with unfair labor practices, saying they didn't recall us due to our speaking up for our rights. Last month, we testified and sat through a trial that ran for 3 weeks. I think we did a good job, but the case is complicated and we don't know what the judge will decide. Workers at the service plazas and across the country have complained that McDonald's doesn't do a good job cleaning their restaurants in the COVID pandemic. But I think McDonald's is doing a very good job using the cover of COVID to clean house. We're lucky to have 32BJ to help us in this fight. Other workers aren't so lucky. They can't take their cases through a difficult trial. We all deserve to have the clear protection of the law on our side. Please help us in our fight for fair treatment and pass the recall bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Rosa, and thank you for testifying here today. I do remember meeting you.
I know.
And it's good to see you here. The story you're telling is exactly what a professor described to us, that people who assert their rights, people who say, I have a right to a different, to a better wage under the law, or I have a right to things that need to be corrected because the laws are there to protect you. That sometimes people who raise their voices and make complaints do not get called back after a layoff. And you seem to be a perfect example of this based on your testimony. I just wondered if you could tell us how many employees in that McDonald's were affected. Do you know how many workers were not recalled and new workers were hired?
Ella dice que tú eres un ejemplo perfecto de lo que una profesora estaba diciendo, de que gente que levanta la voz terminan muchas veces sin trabajo o con otros, no les dejan, cortan las horas o los tratan mal de alguna manera. Y tu testimonio demuestra de que tenemos que corregir este problema, y ella quiere saber si sabes cuántos empleados fueron despedidos, fueron afectados y nunca llamados de vuelta en el McDonald's.
Ok, cuando inició la pandemia salieron como 20 y tantos empleados y solamente llamaron como a 15 de ellos, y 7 o 8 empleados estamos afuera, no nos han llamado.
So when COVID hit, they let go of 20-something workers and they only recalled about 15 of them. So 10 or more were not recalled, and now about 7 of us have been left without work.
And so as a follow-up to that question, you mentioned in your testimony that McDonald's hired new workers. Can you tell me approximately how many new workers were hired by McDonald's instead of bringing back the laid off workers?
¿Me puedes decir cuántos trabajadores nuevos McDonald's encontró en vez de darles trabajos de vuelta a la gente que estaba trabajando ahí?
Tenían 7 o 8 empleados que habían contratado, pero solo alcanzaron a entrar y estar en el horario de trabajo 3 de ellos.
Oh, they hired about 7 or 8, but they didn't work out, and so they ended up with just 3 new employees.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to tell you that it was my experience last summer with you all that led me to speak out about this problem and resulted in us bringing this bill forward. It's being brought by many people today, but when we heard Representative Porter and myself were both there, and when we heard your problems, we heard from you. We did raise our voices, and in fact, there were newspaper articles about it. And so I just want you to understand that the sacrifice you've made is important beyond just for yourself, but for all the workers who are in similar situations. So thank you so much for raising your voice and making this sacrifice.
La senadora quiere dejarles saber de que por los problemas que ustedes sufrieron, ella y el representante Porter hicieron esta propuesta de ley que tienen que tomar la gente primero que habían tenido el trabajo. y le da las gracias por haber elevado tu voz, porque el sacrificio que tú estás dando le va a ayudar a muchos otros trabajadores.
Muchísimas gracias por ayudarnos.
Thank you so much for helping
No
us.
tengo palabras para agradecerles a todos y espero que se haga una ley por tanta gente que quedó afuera. Muchas
I don't
gracias.
even have the words to thank you, and I really hope that we can make a law that will protect workers in the future. Thank you so much.
Gracias, gracias.
Gracias, thank you. You have a nice day, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I won't take up much time. I just wanted to concur with the statements made by my co-chair, Senator Kushner. You have been an impetus, a catalyst, a champion, a hero, and we are really doing our best to make sure that the benefits align with the sacrifices that you've made. So thank you again for being here, and thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your courage. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Porter. I think she went to attend to her 3 daughters, but I will certainly relay that message to her. Thanks again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next, we have, thank you, sir, Nathan Schaffner.
Hi, sorry about that. I appreciate your indulgence in dealing with my technological snafu. I'm Nathan Schaffner. I'm an attorney in Groton, and I'm here in my capacity as the chairman of the Connecticut Trial Lawyers Association, as well as a workers' comp attorney for almost 33 years. I've submitted written remarks, and I'll briefly summarize them. I'm in support of proposed bill 141 dealing with the presumption of cancers for firefighters. I've had the opportunity to litigate in workers' comp a cancer claim by a fireman, and there are no easy tasks to do because the years and years of exposures and trying to pinpoint down which fire caused what, it's just a nightmare to handle. With the presumption, it creates a very easy burden to at least get the case going. And what I think is important about this bill is there's a fairness aspect to this, because the fairness aspect is it's just not going to apply to everyone. Obviously, it's going to apply to the municipal firefighters as well as the volunteer, but it's also going to apply to those who've had a certain number of years of service, those with no pre-existing cancers, and as well as those with a certain frequency of attending of the fires. And I think those are safeguards for all the employers. And so I think it creates a balance in the workers' comp forum to handle these claims that firemen need. The second set of bills I'm going to testify to are those involving the classification of extending mental and emotional claims beyond the number one, what's called the physical mental claims, and also extending Public Act 1917. 1917 was a seminal piece of legislation, not just in Connecticut, but really nationwide. And it opened the door and it recognized the importance of the emotional stress factors that firemen and police officers deal with on a daily basis that can impact their lives on an emotional level. And we've seen this play out over and over again. But the idea of including correction officers and EMTs as well as dispatchers is equally important. But we think that Senator Looney's bill, which would include all employees, is even a better idea, and I'll say why. Is the idea that an injury in the workplace can only be limited to a physical injury is just something that has gone by the wayside. And we've seen this play out in Connecticut in some unfortunate travesties. We've seen coworkers watch their fellow workers murdered in the Sandy Hook shooting, at the lottery shooting, as well as in that distributor. We've seen coworkers at the plant in Middletown explosion watch their other coworkers be injured and hurt. And these take emotional tolls on people that are real, that impact their work activities, not to mention their livelihoods. By at least allowing these emotional claims to be considered as compensable in the workers' comp forum is appropriate, because if it's not, what happens is these costs get shifted out into society. And now all of a sudden you have these state agencies that are being taxed and utilized where they should be within the workers' compensation forum. So the idea of extending it to all employees, as Senator Looney's proposing, we think is the better approach. The last bill that I want to talk about is the one on undue delay that would establish additional penalties for an employer or respondent that chooses to not pay an award. And we think that's appropriate. But we also want to take one extra step on that. Is last year in 2019, the governor signed into law the ordering of a task force on undue delay, and that was chaired by Representative Susan Johnson. And unfortunately, due to the COVID, everything got shut down with that. But that committee was starting to really get at the nub of really the different types of undue delay in the workers' comp system. We maintain as the trial lawyers that undue delay exists, and while matters may be able to sometimes be resolved at hearings, the point of fact is that by the time you get to a hearing, the issue is already either gone by the wayside and people haven't been paid, or now they're all of a sudden getting paid and everyone just sort of wants to move on. What the task force was doing was coming up with ideas, whether it be proposals for the chairman's office to handle administratively, or would it be actual legislation that would address some of these inequities that plague the injured worker on these undue delays. So in addition to supporting the undue delay bill, we ask that this committee seriously consider the reinstatement of that undue delay task force to continue the good work it was doing in
Mr.
galvanizing
Schaffner,
the issue.
your 3 minutes are up. Please
Okay,
continue.
and if anyone has any other questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Senator Kushner. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Sanchez. Excellent first-time job as chairing public hearing. As a new representative, we applaud you for your acumen and your ability to step in and help out. Thank you so much. And so now I will ask if there are any questions for Mr. Schaffner. I know, Mr. Schaffner, you testified before us in the past about workers' comp issues, and I always find your experience really helpful to understanding the process. And so I appreciate that you have addressed these issues for us today, especially there hasn't been any other testimony on the bill pertaining to undue delay in workers' comp, and so that is helpful to us in our deliberations. I think that I see no other hands. So at this point, I will move on to our next person on the list. Thank you for being with us tonight.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thank you. Next up, we have Elizabeth Frazier.
Hi, good afternoon or evening, Representative Kushner, Senator Kushner, Representative Porter, and members of the committee. My name is Liz Fraser, and I'm the Policy Director for the Connecticut Association for Human Services, and I'm here in support of Senate Bill 668, an act concerning a fair work week. This is the moment to begin to address the inequities in our system that have contributed to one of the largest wealth gaps in the country. Through our policies, we can either construct barriers to keep families from prospering or provide an environment that allows families the opportunity to thrive. And passage of SB 668 is one step in the right direction. Pre-pandemic data tells us that 25% of all Connecticut children were living in a household where no parent had year-round full-time employment. This includes 16% of white children, 15% of Asian children, 38% of Black children, and 38% of Hispanic children. The parents of these children are mostly working in these part-time or seasonal jobs, often with low wages and few, if any, company benefits. It is difficult enough to support a family with part-time employment, but unpredictable scheduling increases this burden. I lost my place. When work schedules change unexpectedly, parents struggle to find reliable childcare, navigate transportation, or even schedule a doctor's appointment. And it's even more stressful for single parents who are the only source of income for their family and may not have a convenient support system to help at a moment's notice. With low-wage families, they often qualify for support such as Husky, SNAP, WIC, or Care for Kids. A cause report done several years ago found that unpredictable scheduling and hours led to rapid changes in benefits. Parents interviewed spoke about living with the insecurity of never knowing which support might be affected by the great variance in hours over days or months. For an example, once upon a time, I managed an adult ed program for moms and babies. One young mom attended adult education classes every day with her 2-year-old son, as many days as she could, because besides attending school, she participated in birth to 3 supports available for her child who had autism spectrum disorder, and she worked part-time in the service industry. With unpredictable hours, she sometimes had to miss school, increasing the time it took to graduate, and interfering with her ability to set up appointments with birth to 3. And finally, when asked to work many more hours because of a staffing issue, her wages were pushed just over the qualifying limit for her public housing, and her rent was substantially increased. The stress on this mom, who was doing the best she could to get ahead and for her baby, was heartbreaking. It is difficult to work your way out of this paradigm. Employee hours are at the discretion of the company, making it difficult to secure that second job or get that education that helps to lead to greater opportunity. And it traps many families in a cycle of multi-generational poverty. Families in these situations can barely look ahead and live under a constant cloud of uncertainty. And as you heard before, research informs us that sustained stress in a household has very negative effects on children. The dynamic from the stress can provide an environment of toxic stress and really impact a child's long-term outcomes. Establishing guidelines around a fair work week is the right thing to do. This action will afford working parents the ability to manage their family obligations and family budget without the fear of abrupt changes in scheduling that are disruptive to family stability. Families need stability and children need stability. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony, Elizabeth. And I do see one hand. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Senator Kushner, Madam Co-Chair. Great to see you, Elizabeth.
It's nice to see you as well, Representative.
I knew which bill you were testifying on because of the work that we've done. It wasn't hard to figure it out. You and Meryl, I'll tell you the same thing that I told Mr. Gay. First of all, I just want to thank you for the work that you do on behalf of children and families throughout the state. You truly are a champion for the people. And with that work you do, you have intimate experience and exposure to families, children, parents, extended family. Can you just tell me how this is impacting the folks that you work with and why you feel it's so necessary, why you're here this evening to testify on this particular bill?
Sure. Right now I'm working at the Connecticut Association for Human Services in policies, and I'm doing this work because of the families I've worked with in my past jobs. I worked for an Even Start program with very, very low income moms and their babies who just needed high school or to learn English. And I will tell you that every parent who has a baby, there's a moment, you know, when you just want everything you want for that baby, for that child. You will do anything, you will work anywhere just to make sure that that child is fine. Many of these young women and men sometimes did not want to go on benefits. They wanted to work. They wanted to work. And yet the jobs that they were in kept them back and were not allowing them the opportunity to get ahead. It was heartbreaking for me. And that is one of the reasons that, you know, the injustice was one of the reasons that I went into policy work and tried to make a difference in a broader way. But I will tell you that there are many, many, many women. I think, I don't know, I can't remember this statistic at this moment, but it's about 9 or 10% of children, moms don't have a high school diploma yet even. And we really need to start providing supports for moms and dads who just want to get ahead. You know, it's not only good for that family, it's good for our economy and our whole society. When more money goes into their pockets, it goes right back into our society. And I think we're missing the big picture here, that we need to look at our whole and what will be better for our state. And that's where everyone has an opportunity to thrive and prosper.
Well, thank you so much for that response. Chock full of just everything that speaks to why this is necessary. And you are doing a phenomenal job. And I think that the parents and the families that you worked on behalf of and continue to work on behalf of are appreciative, as am I. Partnerships, teamwork makes the dream work, and you are part of the team. And I thank you for being here this evening and hanging in there with us. I know it's been a while, but thank you for hanging in there and for testifying and getting that on the record. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your kind words. Hope to see you in person soon.
You're welcome. I know.
Thank you.
More
Thank
children
you.
work to do.
Sorry, I thought you guys were done. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I don't see any other hands, but thanks for testifying today. Next up, I do want to apologize. I'm going to go back to number 59. I skipped you inadvertently, Mr. Blair. I think some might think I did it intentionally, but
I do not think you did. That's okay.
I swear I didn't, but in the transfer of the chair to me, I just overlooked it and I didn't see you there. So I apologize. And please, thank you for being with us tonight, and go ahead and proceed.
I did not take it personally. Thank you, Senator. Good evening, Senator Kushner, Representative Porter, Senator Sampson, Representative Aurora, and members of the Labor and Public Employees Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present testimony today. My name is John Blair. I'm Associate Counsel here at CBIA. As you know, CBIA is Connecticut's largest business organization with thousands of members, small and large, representing a diverse range of industries, and 95% of our members have 100 or less employees. Today, I'm here to testify in opposition to two bills on the agenda. One is proposed Bill 660, an act expanding workers' compensation benefit for mental and emotional impairment suffered by all workers. And the second bill is HB 5952, an act eliminating undue delay in payment of worker compensation awards. As you're aware, the workers' compensation is a no-fault system designed as an exclusive remedy for employees. Employers must compensate their employees for work-related injuries through wage replacement and medical benefits. This system has been in place in Connecticut since 1913. It provides a stable, predictable system and efficient disposition of claims. It should be noticed that disputes resolved through Workers' Compensation Commission are done so in a much more timely fashion than any court of law. In the early 1990s, as people have spoken about, workers' compensation rates were exceedingly high. Premiums were crippling small businesses in the state, and the state's program was running billion-dollar unfunded liabilities. As a result, the legislature, in its wisdom, adopted a series of reforms that resulted in the healthy market we have today. It should be noted that this model from the early 90s was duplicated by 42 other states. At the time, benefits for mental and emotional injuries were included as part of the system, but the state removed those provisions after many complaints and concerns about frivolous claims. To bring us to present day, as of 2019, we have a very robust workers' compensation program. Premiums and rates have decreased for 6 straight years, reflecting not only an ongoing decrease in the number of workplace injuries and claims filed, but also reinforcing the carefully crafted reforms put in place in the early 90s. If this proposal is passed, it'll likely result in a direct financial impact on struggling businesses in our state. The expansion of coverage of workers' compensation increases premiums on businesses of all sizes. This kind of employer mandate couldn't come at a worse time, and we can at least afford the direct costs. Employers who are already struggling amidst the pandemic to stay afloat do not need to incur new direct costs. We would respectfully request the committee to take careful consideration of the impacts cost on the workers' comp system and employers at this critical time. And as far as the last thing I'd like to comment on is proposed House Bill 5952, an act eliminating undue delay. The gentleman spoke earlier about the special act that was passed, and a lot of the evidence that was provided around undue delay showed that there wasn't as much of a problem as one might think, and that the remedies within the workers' comp program mostly took care of those issues. That's not to say there aren't issues within the program, but most of them, I believe, weren't found to be as detrimental as once thought. I'd be happy to take any questions. And I'd like to also, as a former committee clerk, thank Devin and Rich Hanratty and John Moran and the committee staff for continuing to make this happen in very difficult times. It's hard when we're all in the building to do it. So I appreciate the committee and its staff for taking the time and trying to get this done in the most efficient manner as possible. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, John. I'm still waiting to see if there's any hands. I want to screw up on that one too. I do not see any hands. So thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for your time tonight and good luck.
Take care. Okay, we have Colin Provost. Is Colin here? Okay, I am told that he is not here. So the next on my list is number 63, Kevin O'Mara. Is Kevin here? Thank you. There you are. We can see you now, so go ahead. We can't hear you yet, though. Are you speaking? That looks like it'll work. We don't hear you. He's going to put in his earbuds, I bet, his headphones. No, we still can't hear you. Devin, can you try and assist here?
Fortunately, Madam Chair, I think that it's an external issue.
Okay, Kevin, I'm going to ask if you can work on that, and then we will come back to you. I'm going to go to the next person and see if you can get your sound up. We can see you, but we cannot hear you. So I'm going to move on to Sonia Hernandez, and then we'll come back to you, Mr. O'Mara. Is Sonia here? I don't see Sonia. Oh, Representative Porter?
Hey, I will put my hand down. I just wanted to tell Kevin that he may need to dial in, and then that way you can speak from your phone and still have the visual on your laptop. There may be something going on with your laptop and the mic. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Let's give him a chance to try and do that. Perhaps while you're working on that, and Kevin, in order to do that, I believe if you go back to the audio settings at the bottom of your Zoom screen, over by the microphone icon there, there's an arrow up, and you may be able to see audio settings there. If you click on that, and then go to
How was that?
oh, you're back. Thank you. Yeah. Good.
Okay, here we go. Let's try this again. Thank you for having me. Again, thank you for everybody here. I'll just get right into it. Today, I'm going to just start off with a famous quote that rings so true in our profession and all the professions that we've listed today as far as the first responders in this bill of SB 666. The only source of knowledge is experience. Albert Einstein. My name, like I said, is Kevin O'Mara. I'm 41 years old. I'm a correctional lieutenant with the Connecticut Department of Corrections for the past 15 years. I have three amazing and beautiful daughters, better known to me as my three reasons for living. Kaylin, 10 years old, Kira, 6 years old, and Mackenzie, 4 years old. These gifts from God has put my life in a perspective that I could not have dreamed of otherwise. I began the job of correction officer on December 9th, 2005 at Garner Correctional Institution, where the state of Connecticut houses its most severe and mental health inmates, which in turn are arguably the most unpredictable and dangerous types of inmates, whether highly assaultive, severely self-injurious, to full-blown suicide attempts. Weeks after graduating the academy, I was assaulted by an inmate while I was alone in a cell conducting a shakedown, which is a search of inmate belongings. Connecticut State Police were called and later charged and arrested the inmate. I physically survived the attack, cornered in the back of that cell, but the negative effects and toll that this assault took on my mental health are still surfacing today, as that attack represented the tiny snowball that has slowly, inevitably, and exponentially grown into an unmanageable and unbearable glacier of mental anguish that surfaces and manifests itself at random times and situations. mostly in the form of anxiety, anger, and explosive rage. Throughout the remainder of my 6 years tenure at thereafter at Garner CI, I have personally been exposed to suicide attempts requiring my assistance in lifting the seemingly lifeless bodies just enough for another staff member to cut the ligature with a suicide rescue tool so that life-saving measures can immediately commence. I have personally had human feces and urine thrown at me and on me. In 2012, I transferred to Cheshire Correctional Institution, where shortly thereafter I was again attacked and assaulted by another inmate while conducting a similar cell shakedown, as I highlighted before. Once again, I physically survived the attack on my life, but the proverbial glacier of mental and psychological effects steadfastly moved further forward to the forefront of my everyday life. And all the while gathering any and all negative mental debris as I found myself to be along for the ride. At times on the edge of mental breakdown, constantly angry, lashing out at loved ones. Most unfortunately, my daughters who have seen their beloved daddy seemingly more mad than happy. In August of 2014, I was appointed at Cheshire CI's intelligence gang officer, where I was tasked with gathering any and all information. During this time, I was again assaulted while actively attempting to obtain drugs from a highly assaultive inmate. Again, Connecticut State Police were called to charge the inmate accordingly. Also, during this time, as a facility intelligence officer, I was unfortunately witness to and subsequently the investigating officer for an incident in which one of my fellow brothers in blue was stabbed in the neck in one of the main hallways in the facility. In September of 2016, I was proudly promoted to the rank of lieutenant at Cheshire CI. The use and dependence of alcohol became an unavoidable and undeniable problem in my life, and the relentless pressures of my job unforgivingly surmounted. In October 26th of 2019, I successfully, with the assistance of my therapist, quit drinking and attempt to be a better man, and most of all, a better father. On July 24th of 2020, I responded to a code white, a medical emergency. As a direct supervisor in charge where an inmate, a human being, took his last labored breaths while suffering cardiac arrest, I watched as medical staff and fellow correction officers delivered life-saving measures. The only thing I could do was say a prayer for that man, the human being dying on the floor at my feet. The man passed away shortly thereafter. The days and weeks following this horrible event has since shown itself to be my ultimate breaking point, as the effects of mental anguish took its toll as the ultimate loss of control, manifesting itself in full-blown panic attacks, anxiety, rage beyond comprehension to the point of breaking objects around the house, punching walls, doors, etc. Worst of all, my 3 beautiful daughters have become the vulnerable and innocent witnesses of my rage and anger, seeing daddy lose control, resulting in them huddling together in the corner of the couch, screaming in fear. Later, after I've calmed down and collected myself, and during one of my many apologies to their crying eyes, Kira, while still hysterical, said, "Daddy, you were scarier than a lion." This is just one of the disgusting examples of countless incidents where I have absolute zero control. I am a broken man. I am not the same human being as I once was 15 long years ago. I cannot quite remember myself, to be honest, but I know for sure that I am forever changed. In the month following the death of the inmate at my feet, I have been and continue to this day to attend 2 separate therapists, including EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a deep therapy which assists in processing the traumas the correct way in order to learn further skills of processing the inevitable future traumas. This comp case was, of course, denied, and at this time, as we speak, is in appeals, seemingly in vain, as I and my fellow brothers and sisters in blue remain the forgotten cops, as we are inevitably out of sight and out of mind. Yet we have all raised our right hand while swearing the same oath to protect and serve the residents of the state of Connecticut. I absolutely and respectfully urge you to include myself and my correctional brothers and sisters in blue into the PTSI bill. I urge you to look at this not as a further financial burden to the state, but to hold on to and not lose sight of the human element while some of you might be asking, isn't this what you signed up for? And to those of you that with that mindset, I say no. While some elements highlighted today do understandably come with the territory, if my first day at the academy, I was presented with what would later be my mental health treatment plan that starts in 15 years, maybe my life would have been different. And maybe most of all, I would not have completely lost the identity of the man that I once was. I respectfully thank you for your time and consideration and pray that you see this all as a very serious problem and deal with the reality accordingly. Thank you.
You know, Kevin, I want to just say to you, thank you for testifying. It is amazing to me that you've had to wait this long. And I think that is something that none of us who are here on this committee feel good about. I do want to let you know, 2 years ago, I was in the hallway as we discussed and essentially resolved how to deal with the fact that some classifications, really important classifications, had been left out of the 2019 bill that we passed.
Yes.
And in that conversation, I just want you to know you did have a representative there. Brian Anderson was there, had been there, I guess, many years advocating for the inclusion of the Department of Corrections for PTSD coverage. And that night, his being there and advocating for you is what brought us to the point where I now feel confident we will be including you in coverage when we pass this bill this session. I hope
Great to hear.
Get it done, and I hope that I hope that you stay with us and that you keep working on this. And it is, your testimony was so compelling, and I wish you, really the best in facing these issues, bringing them up, and getting the treatment that we all hope that you'll have an opportunity to get past this. I think the other thing that has been shared with us today that is so important, and when I say get past this, I guess that doesn't really suffice, because you never really get past it, but be able to deal with it in your life. And I think the thing that's been brought to our attention that's so important too is that we don't want to lose you as a valuable servant to the state of Connecticut. And one of the things that we've heard repeatedly is that with treatment, people recover and are able to go on with the work as well as their family life. So, I do want to call on Representative Porter, but I felt like it was important to say these things to you, so you know that what you've gone through and your testimony here is very meaningful.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, first of all, for your service and all you've been through. I mean, I will say the same thing that I've said to your fellow brothers that have come before you and testified tonight and last year and whenever they testified. This is not the first go round, but as Senator Kushner said, we really do hope to get this done this year. We both came to the realization that there were people left out that should have been included, and we're looking to make that right this year. There is so much power in story, and what you just shared with us tonight was very powerful. And I just want to thank you for being able to put your guard down and to be vulnerable and to have the courage to say what needed to be said. And I just want you to know that you and your family are in my prayers, and that all of you, not just you, but all of your brothers and sisters that are serving in the capacity that you do, and you're very much appreciated. So thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It is in my opinion, all about the vulnerability and admitting it. It's the bottom line. We're told, over and over again in our trainings and everything else, and it's all good intent, but recognize the signs. But again, the unfortunate part is the fact that, as of course the reason we're here is when you do recognize the signs, what is the next step? Other than not being able to go to work for a period of time, all of those things, the two therapists, my primary and a psychiatrist, and everything that was needed to be done was what I had to do. There was no other choice. The problem with it is just the fact that, yes, you can concurrently work and go to therapists, of course, right? And I've done that leading up to and over the years because it was necessary. The problem is when you or not at work, and you're then getting to a point where you're not getting paid or whatever the case is. And all you're really looking for is hoping that FMLA will cover you, right? If there's a situation where, technicality where they weren't able to cover, you have nothing to cover the days, and you're almost even facing discipline. I mean, I don't want to get too far into all that, but to be able to work on what you need to work on. All right. I mean, being at work with this, and I'll give you a little funny analogy, but it kind of works. Kind of like the show Hoarders, right? The hoarder's house. You empty it out. You're not going to throw everything away. You're going to put it in the front yard. Figure out what are you going to do with all this stuff. Some stuff we're going to keep. Some stuff we're going to get rid of. The stuff we're keeping, where do we put it, right? But the problem is when you're forced to go back to work because you just can't afford to be out and you're not covered, you might as well take all that stuff from the front yard, if you will, throw it right back in the house and be climbing over stuff, and you're left to just deal with it. So that's it. So I appreciate your words, and I think you guys all understand, and hopefully we can get this where it needs to be.
Thank you. And we want you to have the tools you need to deal with it. We need you well. We want you well. And more importantly, your daughters, your family need you well.
Absolutely.
And you need to be well for yourself. So just know that we're fighting a good fight, and we won't stop until we get where we need to get you all made whole. So thank you again for being with us this evening. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
And Kevin, I just want to give a shout out to the Correct Union that represents you, and that's the CSEA. So thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, and thank you to them as well. They've been a great help as well. So thank you.
Okay, next we have Sonia Hernandez is here with us. So you can unmute yourself, and we will hear your testimony.
Hi, so good afternoon, dear Senator Schumer and Representative Porter and member of the Labor and Public Employees Committee. My name is Sonia Hernandez, and I am the Fireback organizer in Make the Road, Connecticut. And I will read a testimony from our member that has been impacted with this bill. So she's not here today because she's working and because her question is changing. So she's afraid to have realizations, and they can cut up her day off. So her name is Janet Alfaro, and she lives in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and she's the leader of the Fireback in Mothers in Action and committees in Make the Road, Connecticut. She works in a restaurant, and I stand in support of the SB 66A and act concerning a fair work week schedule. During the pandemic, my work has been affected 100% because the restaurant closed without work, or any economic release was hard to provide for my daughter and I. I am a single mom that worked hard to bring food and have a place to sleep with my family. I am undocumented, and because of my status, I don't qualify for any economic relief package or an unemployment. When I return to work, they only give me 4 to 6 hours daily. Then in the middle of the week, I call me to not come to work because it's so, or they don't need me. When I was going to work, I didn't feel safe. They didn't give us any equipment or protection. So I was afraid to get sick or call out. Then they sent me home for 2 more days because I was not feeling well. So I called out, and they punished me with 2 days more off. I didn't go to work. So they don't give us time off, or they don't give us extra money or any kind of extra for holiday, day off, or bonus. I feel intimidated because they put video cameras everywhere. They check us our time, how much we take to eat, or if we take anything extra from what they give us to eat, they charge us, or just know what we are doing. My schedule changes every week. They tell me that I'm gonna work 8 hours a day, but instead of that, I work 5 hours. Sorry. daily. When I have my day off, I am happy because I will spend the day with my daughter, but they call me to work out. It's hard for me because as a single mom, I don't have no relatives or friends to leave my daughter with. So I have to pay extra money. That's not fair because my supervisor, the owners know that I need the job and they do whatever they like or they want because they are our boss. So sometimes they change my schedule. If they give me a schedule, I make plans to do grocery shopping, spend time with my daughter. But at the last minute, they change and they call me telling me my schedule has changed. I need this work because if I report anything unexpected, I am afraid that I can get fired. That's why I'm not speaking up against this injustice at work. I depend from my job to provide food and keep a place to sleep for my daughter. The supervisor or the owner does not care about the employees or being healthy, or they care only how much money we make or produce daily. That's why I strongly support the SB 66A, the Fair Work Week bill. I hope this committee and the Connecticut lawmakers will vote in favor of this year. Empower Connecticut hours workers so we can have the best opportunity to support our families and be stronger participants in our economy. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Janet Alfaro.
Thank you, Sonia. And please let Jeanette know that we appreciated her submitting this testimony and you coming to read it. It really does mean a lot to us. And we've heard from other workers with some of the same issues and confronting the same problems, but we really do appreciate hearing from her. And we're going to see what we can do about addressing some of these problems. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I don't see any hands. And so thank you for tonight, and we'll move on to the next person on the list. And I see next Robert Glassby. Robert, I saw you over there earlier.
Hello.
Hello, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing well. You got this whole ball rolling a couple of years ago, so good that you're here to testify. I know it's been a long time coming. We had hoped to see you last year, but because of COVID, we couldn't get there. So
Understandable.
good to see you tonight.
Good to see you. I just wanted to thank Madam Chair Kushner and Representative Porter, as well as the esteemed committee members. My name is Robert Glassby, and I'm here today on behalf of CAPE, advocating for EMS frontline first responders from across the state. We want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about SB 665 today. Our association has a vested interest in having the general statutes amended to extend workers' compensation benefits for certain mental or emotional impairments to emergency medical services personnel. EMS providers respond to critical incidences that lead to an increased risk of mental health illness as seen in other frontline first responders. EMS providers from across the state just ask that you consider at least a few of the qualifying events that frontline first responders may come across, like things like viewing a deceased minor or witnessing a traumatic physical injury that results in the loss of a vital body part or body function that results in permanent disfigurement of the victim. These are just a couple of the qualifying events that are listed in Public Act 1917. And we just kind of ask, could you imagine any of those events occurring without EMS personnel being involved? EMS personnel are directly exposed to these qualifying events, and extending these benefits to EMS providers is only appropriate. In Connecticut, our emergency services are comprised of a variety of public and private agencies who work collaboratively to serve the public. EMS personnel incur the same risk of suffering from PTSD as other frontline first responders, but yet haven't been protected by general statutes as of yet. There are at least 7 other states that have already passed legislation that provides workers' compensation benefits for EMS providers. We would like Connecticut to be added to that list. Watching testimony from the State Senate and the House of Representative floors, the idea of extending these benefits to EMS frontline first responders was had seemingly received bipartisan support. We at CAPE hope to see this come to fruition, and we're here today asking for your committee support and seeing that it does come to fruition. The public relies on the EMS providers that CAPE advocates for, but those same providers rely on you to protect them as well. We want to thank you for your time and your support in this matter, and I'll try my best to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Robert. I will give a minute to see if there are any questions. I do see Representative Aurora.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rob, for your testimony. I really do appreciate it. I think the issues we have heard this morning, and I think you really summed them up very well. And you know, it's really very much appreciated to hear, you know, the different points of view all coming together. And you know, we really appreciate what you know, and this is, I'm just talking specifically to EMS since you bring those up, what the EMS does for our community and for all of us. And I think it's important to look at these issues carefully and do the right thing. So I appreciate you coming up and providing those insights to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Representative. And now I don't see any other hands, but I do want to say, Robert, that we'll be working on drafting bill language, and we certainly will be reaching out to you, and you should reach out to us to make sure that we get this right. But we look forward to getting it done this year.
Absolutely. We definitely appreciate the opportunity to provide any collaborative effort that you guys need, whether it's this committee or another that might have any impact on EMS as a profession.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here tonight.
Thank you. Take care.
I'm going to move to the last speaker that I have. We're going back to Kyle Hauser. The floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you getting me on. My name is Kyle Hauser. I am testifying in support of Senate Bill 141. I represent the 250 members of the Stanford Professional Firefighters Association, and I sit on the Legislative Committee of the Uniformed Professional Firefighters of Connecticut. I'm offering testimony that I hope will further clarify a point that has been touched upon by previous speakers, because I think it deserves some extra attention. A question that must be answered, a fair question that I've heard asked is, why is the Cancer Relief Fund not adequate? Well, the root of the problem is the lack of the presumptive cancer coverage through workers' compensation. There is no amount of money that we can put into the Cancer Relief Fund that will help firefighters and their families if their occupational cancer forces them off the job or takes their life. I'm going to repeat that because it's the heart of this bill, I feel. There is no amount of money that we can put into the Cancer Relief Fund that will help firefighters and their families if the occupational cancer forces them off the job or takes their life. A firefighter that has not been on the job long enough to be vested in their employer's pension will currently not receive a disability pension if cancer forces them off the job. Their family will not receive a disability pension if the firefighter loses his or her life to occupational cancer. You see, disability pensions are based upon disability ratings. Connecticut workers' compensation is in control of this matrix of disability ratings, and the state doesn't recognize occupational cancer for firefighters in a presumptive manner. No rating, no disability pension. In the case of a firefighter that is not vested, that means no pension at all, as if you never worked for the fire department. It also means no health care for a family of a firefighter who can no longer work as a firefighter or is deceased. You're treated the same as the employee who simply quits the job to go work somewhere else. We are asking that firefighters with occupational cancer be treated the same as firefighters who are injured or killed actively fighting a structure fire. That's all I have. thank you for your time, and please support SB 141.
Thank you. And I see there is a hand, so let me, Representative Aurora.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kyle. I lived in Stamford for over 10 years. So, Stamford is very close to my heart. And Stamford, all essential services, especially the fire service, has to be close to my heart because that's what I relied on while I was living there for so many years. But that doesn't really mean that just Stamford, but I know you speak for all firefighters across Connecticut. And this is I really appreciate you clarifying, because this issue, obviously everybody has there's bipartisan support to make sure that there is help, but at the same time it's clouded by the deal done or the fund which was set up. So I do appreciate you really focusing on it. That's a really good thing, because we have had so many speakers. We are thinking about just exactly what you said, and I really appreciate the clarity you brought into it. So just to, maybe it's a comment or a question really. So what really this would do, what you're saying is that the fund itself is not effective or doesn't go enough, because if the outcome is so extreme here, obviously, as you said, that, somebody loses their life, or that much broader set of compensation is needed, which would be so as to say, effectuated by the workmen, by classifying the firefighters as an event for disability versus or line of work event, versus just giving it out at the from the fireman fund, from that special fund. Would that be right, or can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can. I think this will be helpful. To maybe make the more vivid example, right? In the case of Stamford, and first we should say every municipal pension system is a little different, right? But I know in the case of Stamford, you'd have to have 15 years to be vested. So if you had a cancer, I'm not even going to use the most extreme case. Let's say you have a cancer that you survive, but perhaps it's autoimmune based, right? It's blood or something, so you can no longer do the job. You can't do EMS, right? Because that's a big part of our job. You can't be around sick people because you're vulnerable for the rest of your life. So you have to retire as a firefighter. If it's in the 14th year of your career, you wouldn't get anything because you needed 15 years to be vested. However, if this person were to fall off a ladder, right, and break their neck and have to have their neck fused and was forced to retire for that reason, that would come with a rating, right, that we would apply to them, and then they would be able to get the disability pension, and it would be worth, a little more. It'd be closer to something that they can live off, even though they didn't have their 15 years. Is that helpful?
Yeah. So the rating is what is most important in that determination, as you're telling me. And in the case of cancer, because of the fact that it was not directly associated, there is no rating, so as to say. Would that be right?
Okay. Well, I wouldn't agree with the directly associated, just because we have, we view these, certain types of cancers as directly associated. But I understand if your point is it's not like a specific one event. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's not as simple as if you fell off a ladder trying to get someone out a window. That's a little clearer to see in the eyes of workers' comp, but it comes down to the rating. It comes down to workers' comp not recognizing it. So when you go to the pension board, in Stamford, and say, I can't work anymore, I'm sick. If you apply for a disability pension, they want to see the paperwork that says, what rating did you get? Because you probably know, maybe others don't know, that different body parts come with different ratings, right? If you were to lose a limb, it would come with a certain percentage, or, use the, your shoulder no longer worked. Those come with numbers associated.
Well, thank you so much for your service. Really appreciate it. And we're very grateful for it. Especially me specifically because of your town, but we're appreciative of all firefighters across Connecticut. And thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Kyle. That was very helpful and clarified, I think, some of the issues that have been raised. So thank you for being with us tonight. And I will say now that we've come to the end of the public hearing. We have heard the testimony of everyone on the list. And I want to thank everybody for being here today, and especially thank the public for hopefully paying close attention to all the testimony that has been given today as we deliberate and work on providing the best laws that we can for the state of Connecticut to protect working families. So I will, before I adjourn this public hearing, I do want to make sure that the committee members are aware that we will be going into reconvening our committee meeting. But I'm going to suggest that we reconvene at 7:20. That will give us a few minutes to take a little break here and be ready for the business at hand. So we will be going back to the original Zoom link. And just to clarify for committee members, today we had 2 Zoom links that were sent for the committee meeting. The first didn't work on our previous 3 o'clock call. So we had a new one that was sent to us. That one won't work when we reconvene at 7:20. You have to go to the original calendar invite that you have, hopefully can get your hands on for the committee meeting. And we look forward to seeing all committee members there at 7:20 this evening. And thank you for having a very productive hearing today. I think it went well, and look forward to our committee meeting a little later. Take care. Good night to the public.